LETTER XLVIII OF CLARISSA HARLOWE, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 48. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Thursday, July 27th. I went this morning, according to the lady's invitation, to breakfast, and found Mr. Hickman with her. A good deal of heaviness and concern hung upon his countenance, but he received me with more respect than he did yesterday, which I presume was owing to the lady's favourable character of me. He spoke very little, for I suppose they had all their talk out yesterday, and before I came this morning. By the hints that dropped, I perceived that Miss Howe's letter gave an account of your interview with her at Colonel Ambrose's, of your professions to Miss Howe, and Miss Howe's opinion, that marrying you was the only way now left to repair her wrongs. Mr. Hickman, as I also gathered, had pressed her, in Miss Howe's name, to let her, on her return from the Isle of Wight, find her at a neighbouring farmhouse, where neat apartments would be made ready to receive her. She asked how long it would be before they returned, and he told her it was proposed to be no more than a fortnight out and in, upon which she said she should then perhaps have time to consider of that kind proposal. He had tendered her money from Miss Howe, but could not induce her to take any. No wonder I was refused. She only said that, if she had occasion, she would be obliged to nobody but Miss Howe. Mr. Goddard, her apothecary, came in before breakfast was over. At her desire, he sat down with us. Mr. Hickman asked him if he could give him any consolation in relation to Miss Harlowe's recovery, to carry down to a friend who loved her as she loved her own life. The lady, said he, will do very well, if she will resolve upon it herself. Indeed you will, madam. The doctor is entirely of this opinion, and has ordered nothing for you but wheat jellies and innocent cordials, lest you should starve yourself. And let me tell you, madam, that so much watching, so little nourishment, and so much grief as you seem to indulge, is enough to impair the most vigorous health, and to wear out the strongest constitution. What, sir, said she, can I do? I have no appetite. Nothing you call nourishing will stay on my stomach. I do what I can, and have such kind directors in Dr. H. and you, that I should be inexcusable if I did not. I'll give you a regimen, madam, replied he, which I am sure the doctor will approve of, and will make physic unnecessary in your case. And that is, go to rest at 10 at night, rise not till 7 in the morning. Let your breakfast be water gruel, or milk pottage, or weak broths. Your dinner anything you like, so you'll but eat. A dish of tea with milk in the afternoon, and sago for your supper. And my life for yours, this diet, and a month's country air, will set you up. We were much pleased with the worthy gentleman's disinterested regimen, and she said, referring to her nurse, who vouched for her, Pray, Mr. Hickman, let Miss Howe know the good hands I am in; and as to the kind charge of the gentleman, assure her, that all I promised to her, in the longest of my 2 last letters, on the subject of my health, I do, and will, to the utmost of my power, observe. I have engaged, sir, to Mr. Goddard, I have engaged, sir, to me, to Miss Howe, to avoid all wilful neglects. It would be an unpardonable fault, and very ill become the character I would be glad to deserve, or the temper of mind I wish my friends hereafter to think me mistress of, if I did not. Mr. Hickman and I went afterwards to a neighbouring coffee house, and he gave me some account of your behaviour at the ball on Monday night, and of your treatment of him in the conference he had with you before that, which he represented in a more favourable light than you had done yourself. And yet he gave his sentiments of you with great freedom, but with the politeness of a gentleman. He told me how very determined the lady was against marrying you; that she had, early this morning, set herself to write a letter to Miss Howe, in answer to the one he brought her, which he was to call for at 12, it being almost finished before he saw her at breakfast, and that at 3 he proposed to set out on his return. He told me that Miss Howe, and her mother, and himself, were to begin their little journey for the Isle of Wight on Monday next, but that he must make the most favourable representation of Miss Harlowe's bad health, or they should have a very uneasy absence. He expressed the pleasure he had in finding the lady in such good hands. He proposed to call on Dr. H. to take his opinion whether it were likely she would recover, and hoped he should find it favourable. As he was resolved to make the best of the matter, and as the lady had refused to accept of the money offered by Mr. Hickman, I said nothing of her parting with her clothes. I thought it would serve no other end to mention it, but to shock Miss Howe; for it has such a sound with it, that a woman of her rank and fortune should be so reduced, that I cannot myself think of it with patience, nor know I but one man in the world who can. This gentleman is a little finical and formal. Modest or diffident men wear not soon off those little precisenesses which the confident, if ever they had them, presently get above. because they are too confident to doubt any thing. But I think Mr. Hickman is an agreeable, sensible man, and not at all deserving of the treatment or the character you give him. But you are really a strange mortal, because you have advantages in your person, in your air and intellect, above all the men I know, and a face that would deceive the devil. You can't think any man else tolerable. It is upon this modest principle that thou deridest some of us, who, not having thy confidence in their outside appearance, seek to hide their defects by the tailors' and peruke makers' assistance, mistakenly enough, if it be really done so absurdly as to expose them more, and sayest that we do but hang out a sign in our dress of what we have in the shop of our minds. This, no doubt, thou thinkest, is smartly observed. But pr'ythee, Lovelace, let me tell thee, if thou canst, what sort of a sign must thou hang out, wert thou obliged to give us a clear idea by it of the furniture of thy mind? Mr. Hickman tells me he should have been happy with Miss Howe some weeks ago, for all the settlements have been some time engrossed, but that she will not marry, she declares, while her dear friend is so unhappy. This is truly a charming instance of the force of female friendship, which you and I and our brother rakes have constantly ridiculed as a chimerical thing in women of equal age and perfections. But really, Lovelace, I see more and more that there are not in the world, with our conceited pride, narrower souled wretches than we rakes and libertines are. And I'll tell thee how it comes about. Our early love of roguery makes us generally run away from instruction, and so we become mere smatterers in the sciences we are put to learn, and because we will know no more, think there is no more to be known. With an infinite deal of vanity, unreined imaginations, and no judgments at all, we next commence half-wits, and then think we have the whole field of knowledge in possession, and despise every one who takes more pains and is more serious than ourselves, as phlegmatic, stupid fellows, who have no taste for the most poignant pleasures of life. This makes us insufferable to men of modesty and merit, and obliges us to herd with those of our own caste; and by this means we have no opportunities of seeing or conversing with any body who could or would show us what we are; and so we conclude that we are the cleverest fellows in the world, and the only men of spirit in it; and looking down with supercilious eyes on all who gave not themselves the liberties we take, imagine the world made for us, and for us only. Thus, as to useful knowledge, while others go to the bottom, we only skim the surface, are despised by people of solid sense, of true honour, and superior talents, and, shutting our eyes, move round and round, like so many blind mill horses, in one narrow circle, while we imagine we have all the world to range in. I threw myself in Mr. Hickman's way on his return from the lady. He was excessively moved at taking leave of her, being afraid, as he said to me, though he would not tell her so, that he should never see her again. She charged him to represent every thing to Miss Howe in the most favourable light that the truth would bear. He told me of a tender passage at parting, which was, that having saluted her at her closet door, he could not help once more taking the same liberty, in a more fervent manner, at the stairs head, whither she accompanied him, and this in the thought that it was the last time he should ever have that honour, and offering to apologize for his freedom, for he had pressed her to his heart with a vehemence that he could neither account for or resist. Excuse you, Mr. Hickman! That I will. You are my brother and my friend. And to show you that the good man, who is to be happy with my beloved Miss Howe, is very dear to me, you shall carry to her this token of my love, offering her sweet face to his salute, and pressing his hand between hers. And perhaps her love of me will make it more agreeable to her than her punctilio would otherwise allow it to be. And tell her, said she, dropping on one knee, with clasped hands, and uplifted eyes, that in this posture you see me, in the last moment of our parting, begging a blessing upon you both, and that you may be the delight and comfort of each other for many, very many happy years. Tears, said he, fell from my eyes. I even sobbed with mingled joy and sorrow. And she retreating as soon as I raised her, I went down stairs highly dissatisfied with myself for going, yet unable to stay. My eyes fixed the contrary way to my feet, as long as I could behold the skirts of her raiment. I went to the back shop, continued the worthy man, and recommended the angelic lady to the best care of Mrs. Smith. And when I was in the street, cast my eye up at her window. There for the last time I doubt, said he, that I shall ever behold her. I saw her, and she waved her charming hand to me, and with such a look of smiling goodness and mingled concern as I cannot describe. Pr'ythee tell me, thou vile Lovelace, if thou hast not a notion, even from these jejune descriptions of mine, that there must be a more exalted pleasure in intellectual friendship than ever thou couldst taste in the gross fumes of sensuality? And whether it may not be possible for thee, in time, to give that preference to the infinitely preferable, which I hope now that I shall always give? I will leave thee to make the most of this reflection from Thy true friend, J. Belford. End of Letter XLVIII. Letter XLIX. Of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. By Samuel Richardson. Letter XLIX. Miss Howe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Thursday, July 25th. Your two affecting letters were brought to me, as I had directed any letter from you should be, to the Colonel's, about an hour before we broke up. I could not forbear dipping into them there, and shedding more tears over them than I will tell you of, although I dried my eyes as well as I could, that the company I was obliged to return to, and my mother, should see as little of my concern as possible. I am yet, and was then still more, excessively fluttered. The occasion I will communicate to you by and by, for nothing but the flutters given by the stroke of death could divert my first attention from the sad and solemn contents of your last favour. These therefore I must begin with. How can I bear the thoughts of losing so dear a friend? I will not so much as suppose it. Indeed I cannot. Such a mind as yours was not vested in humanity to be snatched away from us so soon. There must still be a great deal for you to do for the good of all who have the happiness to know you. You enumerate in your letter of Thursday last the particulars in which your situation is already mended. Let me see by effects that you are in earnest in that enumeration, and that you really have the courage to resolve to get above the sense of injuries you could not avoid, and then will I trust to Providence and my humble prayers for your perfect recovery. And glad at my heart shall I be, on my return from the little island, to find you well enough to be near us, according to the proposal Mr. Hickman has to make to you. You chide me in yours of Sunday on the freedom I take with your friends. I may be warm. I know I am, too warm. Yet warmth in friendship surely cannot be a crime, especially when our friend has great merit, labours under oppression, and is struggling with undeserved calamity. I have no opinion of coolness in friendship, be it dignified or distinguished by the name of prudence, or what it will. You may excuse your relations. It was ever your way to do so. But, my dear, other people must be allowed to judge as they please. I am not their daughter, nor the sister of your brother and sister. I thank Heaven I am not. But if you are displeased with me for the freedoms I took so long ago as you mentioned, I am afraid, if you knew what passed upon an application I made to your sister very lately, in hopes to procure you the absolution your heart is so much set upon, that you would be still more concerned. But they have been even with me. But I must not tell you all. I hope, however, that these unforgivers, my mother is among them, were always good, dutiful, passive children to their parents. Once more forgive me. I owned I was too warm. But I have no example to the contrary but from you, and the treatment you meet with is very little encouragement to me to endeavour to imitate you in your dutiful meekness. You leave it to me to give a negative to the hopes of the noble family, whose only disgrace is, that so very vile a man is so nearly related to them. But yet, alas, my dear, I am so fearful of consequences, so selfishly fearful, if this negative must be given, I don't know what I should say. But give me leave to suspend, however, this negative till I hear from you again. This earnest courtship of you into their splendid family is so very honourable to you. They so justly admire you. You must have had such a noble triumph over the base man. He is so much in earnest. The world knows so much of the unhappy affair. You may do still so much good. Your will is so inviolate. Your relations are so implacable. Think, my dear, and rethink, and let me leave you to do so, while I give you the occasion of the flutter I mentioned at the beginning of this letter, in the conclusion of which you will find the obligation I have consented to lay myself under to refer this important point once more to your discussion, before I give, in your name, the negative that cannot, when given, be with honour to yourself repented of or recalled. Know then, my dear, that I accompanied my mother to Colonel Ambrose's on the occasion I mentioned to you in my former. Many ladies and gentlemen were there, whom you know, particularly Miss Kitty Doyley, Miss Lloyd, Miss Biddy Dolliff, Miss Biddulph, and their respective admirers, with the Colonel's two nieces, fine women both, besides many whom you know not, for they were strangers to me but by name. A splendid company, and all pleased with one another, till Colonel Ambrose introduced one who, the moment he was brought into the great hall, set the whole assembly into a kind of agitation. It was your villain. I thought I should have sunk as soon as I set my eyes upon him. My mother was also affected, and coming to me, Nancy, whispered she, can you bear the sight of that wretch without too much emotion? If not, withdraw into the next apartment. I could not remove. Everybody's eyes were glanced from him to me. I sat down and fanned myself, and was forced to order a glass of water. Oh, that I had the eye the basilisk is reported to have, thought I, and that his life were within the power of it! Directly would I kill him. He entered with an air so hateful, but so agreeable to every other eye, that I could have looked him dead for that too. After the general salutations, he singled out Mr. Hickman, and told him he had recollected some parts of his behaviour to him when he saw him last, which had made him think himself under obligation to his patience and politeness. And so indeed he was. Miss D'Oyley, upon his complimenting her among a knot of ladies, asked him, in their hearing, how Miss Clarissa Harlowe did. He heard, he said, you were not so well as he wished you to be, and as you deserved to be. O Mr. Lovelace, said she, what have you to answer for on that young lady's account, if all be true that I have heard? I have a great deal to answer for, said the unblushing villain. But that dear lady has so many excellencies, and so much delicacy, that little sins are great ones in her eye. Little sins? Replied Miss D'Oyley. Mr. Lovelace's character is so well known, that nobody believes he can commit little sins. You are very good to me, Miss D'Oyley. Indeed I am not. Then I am the only person to whom you are not very good, and so I am the less obliged to you. He turned, with an unconcerned air, to Miss Playford, and made her some genteel compliments. I believe you know her not. She visits his cousins Montague. Indeed, he had something in his specious manner to say to every body, and this too soon quieted the disgust each person had at his entrance. I still kept my seat, and he either saw me not, or would not yet see me, and addressing himself to my mother, taking her unwilling hand, with an air of high assurance, I am glad to see you here, madam. I hope Miss Howe is well. I have reason to complain greatly of her, but hope to owe to her the highest obligation that can be laid on man. My daughter, sir, is accustomed to be too warm and too zealous in her friendships for either my tranquillity or her own. There had indeed been some late occasion given for mutual displeasure between my mother and me, but I think she might have spared this to him, though nobody heard it, I believe, but the person to whom it was spoken, and the lady who told it me, for my mother spoke it low. We are not wholly, madam, to live for ourselves, said the vile hypocrite. It is not every one who had a soul capable of friendship, and what a heart must that be which can be insensible to the interests of a suffering friend? This sentiment from Mr. Lovelace's mouth, said my mother. Forgive me, sir, but you can have no end, surely, in endeavouring to make me think as well of you as some innocent creatures have thought of you to their cost. She would have flung from him, but detaining her hand, less severe, dear madam, said he, be less severe in this place, I beseech you. You will allow that a very faulty person may see his errors, and when he does, and owns them, and repents, should he not be treated mercifully? Your air, sir, seems not to be that of a penitent, but the place may as properly excuse this subject as what you call my severity. But, dearest madam, permit me to say, that I hope for your interest with your charming daughter, was his sycophant word, to have it put in my power to convince all the world that there never was a truer penitent. And why this anger, dear madam? For she struggled to get her hand out of his. These violent airs, so maidenly. Impudent fellow! May I not ask if Miss Howe be here? She would not have been here, replied my mother, had she known whom she had been to see. And is she here then? Thank Heaven! He disengaged her hand, and stepped forward into company. Dear Miss Lloyd, said he, with an air, taking her hand as he quitted my mother's, tell me, is Miss Arabella Harlowe here? Or will she be here? I was informed she would, and this, and the opportunity of paying my compliments to your friend Miss Howe, were great inducements with me to attend the Colonel. Superlative assurance! Was it not, my dear? Miss Arabella Harlowe, excuse me, sir, said Miss Lloyd, would be very little inclined to meet you here, or any where else. Perhaps so, my dear Miss Lloyd, but perhaps for that very reason I am more desirous to see her. Miss Harlowe, sir, and Miss Biddulph, with a threatening air, will hardly be here without her brother. I imagine if one comes, both will come. Heaven grant they both may, said the wretch. Nothing, Miss Biddulph, shall begin from me to disturb this assembly, I assure you, if they do. One calm half-hour's conversation with that brother and sister would be a most fortunate opportunity to me, in presence of the Colonel and his lady, or whom else they should choose. Then turning round, as if desirous to find out the one or the other, he spied me, and with a very low bow approached me. I was all in a flutter, you may suppose. He would have taken my hand. I refused it, all glowing with indignation, everybody's eyes upon us. I went down from him to the other end of the room, and sat down, as I thought, out of his hated sight. But presently I heard his odious voice whispering behind my chair, the leaning upon the back of it with impudent unconcern, Charming Miss Howe, looking over my shoulder, one request. I started up from my seat, but could hardly stand neither, for very indignation. O this sweet, but becoming disdain! whispered on the insufferable creature. I am sorry to give you all this emotion, but either here or at your own house, let me entreat from you 1/4 of an hour's audience. I beseech you, Madam, but 1/4 of an hour in any of the adjoining apartments. Not for a kingdom, fluttering my fan. I knew not what I did, but I could have killed him. We are so much observed, else on my knees, my dear Miss Howe, would I beg your interest with your charming friend. She'll have nothing to say to you. I had not then your letters, my dear. Killing words! But indeed I have deserved them, and a dagger in my heart besides. I am so conscious of my demerits, that I have no hope but in your interposition. Could I owe that favour to Miss Howe's mediation, which I cannot hope for on any other account. My mediation, vilest of men! My mediation! I abhor you! From my soul I abhor you, vilest of men! 3 or 4 times I repeated these words, stammering too. I was excessively fluttered. You can tell me nothing, Madam, so bad as I will call myself. I have been, indeed, the vilest of men. But now I am not so. Permit me, everybody's eyes are upon us. But 1 moment's audience, to exchange but 10 words with you, dearest Miss Howe, in whose presence you please, for your dear friend's sake, but 10 words with you in the next apartment. It is an insult upon me to presume that I would exchange with you, if I could help it. Out of my way! Out of my sight! Fellow! And away I would have flung, but he took my hand. I was excessively disordered, everybody's eyes more and more intent upon us. Mr. Hickman, whom my mother had drawn on one side to enjoin him a patience, which perhaps needed not to have been enforced, came up just then, with my mother, who had him by his leading strings, by his sleeve, I should say. Mr. Hickman, said the bold wretch, be my advocate but for 10 words in the next apartment with Miss Howe, in your presence, and in yours, Madam, to my mother. Hear, Nancy, what he has to say to you. To get rid of him, hear his 10 words. Excuse me, Madam, his very breath. Unhand me, Sir. He sighed and looked. Oh, how the practised villain sighed and looked! He then let go my hand, with such a reverence in his manner, as brought blame upon me from some, that I would not hear him. And this incensed me the more. O my dear, this man is a devil! The man is indeed a devil! So much patience when he pleases, so much gentleness, yet so resolute, so persisting, so audacious. I was going out of the assembly in great disorder. He was at the door as soon as I. How kind this is, said the wretch, and, ready to follow me, opened the door for me. I turned back upon this, and, not knowing what I did, snapped my fan just in his face, as he turned short upon me, and the powder flew from his hair. Everybody seemed as much pleased as I was vexed. He turned to Mr. Hickman, nettled at the powder flying, and at the smiles of the company upon him. Mr. Hickman, you will be one of the happiest men in the world, because you are a good man, and will do nothing to provoke this passionate lady, and because she has too much good sense to be provoked without reason. But else, the Lord have mercy upon you. This man, this Mr. Hickman, my dear, is too meek for a man. Indeed he is. But my patient mother twits me that her passionate daughter ought to like him the better for that. But meek men abroad are not always meek at home. I have observed that in more instances than one. And if they were, I should not, I verily think, like them the better for being so. He then turned to my mother, resolved to be even with her too. Where, good Madam, could Miss Howe get all this spirit? The company around smiled, for I need not tell you that my mother's high-spiritedness is pretty well known. And she, sadly vexed, said, Sir, you treat me as you do the rest of the world, but I beg pardon, Madam, interrupted he. I might have spared my question. And instantly, I retiring to the other end of the hall, he turned to Miss Playford. What would I give, Madam, to hear you sing that song you obliged us with at Lord M.'s? He then, as if nothing had happened, fell into a conversation with her and Miss D'Olive upon music, and whisperingly sung to Miss Playford, holding her 2 hands, with such airs of genteel unconcern, that it vexed me not a little to look round, and see how pleased half the giddy fools of our sex were with him, notwithstanding his notorious wicked character. To this it is that such vile fellows owe much of their vileness, whereas, if they found themselves shunned and despised, and treated as beasts of prey as they are, they would run to their caverns, there howl by themselves, and none but such as sad accident or unpitiable presumption threw in their way would suffer by them. He afterwards talked very seriously at times to Mr. Hickman. At times, I say, for it was with such breaks and starts of gaiety, turning to this lady and to that, and then to Mr. Hickman again, resuming a serious or a gay air at pleasure, that he took everybody's eye, the women's especially, who were full of their whispering admirations of him, qualified with ifs and buts and what pities, and such sort of stuff, that showed in their very dispraises too much liking. Well may our sex be the sport and ridicule of such libertines, unthinking, eye-governed creatures! Would not a little reflection teach us, that a man of merit must be a man of modesty, because a diffident one; and that such a wretch as this must have taken his degrees in wickedness, and gone through a course of vileness, before he could arrive at this impenetrable effrontery; an effrontery which can produce only from the light opinion he has of us, and the high one of himself. But our sex are generally modest and bashful themselves, and are too apt to consider that which in the main is their principal grace as a defect; and finely do they judge, when they think of supplying that defect by choosing a man that cannot be ashamed. His discourse to Mr. Hickman turned upon you, and his acknowledged injuries of you, though he could so lightly start from the subject, and return to it. I have no patience with such a devil. Man he cannot be called. To be sure he would behave in the same manner any where, or in any presence, even at the altar itself, if a woman were with him there. It shall ever be a rule with me, that he who does not regard a woman with some degree of reverence will look upon her, and occasionally treat her, with contempt. He had the confidence to offer to take me out; but I absolutely refused him, and shunned him all I could, putting on the most contemptuous airs; but nothing could mortify him. I wished 20 times I had not been there. The gentlemen were as ready as I to wish he had broken his neck, rather than been present, I believe; for nobody was regarded but he. So little of the fop, yet so elegant and rich in his dress; his person so specious; his air so intrepid; so much meaning and penetration in his face; so much gaiety, yet so little affectation; no mere toupee man, but all manly; and his courage and wit, the one so known, the other so dreaded. You must think the petits maîtres, of which there were 4 or 5 present, were most deplorably off in his company; and one grave gentleman observed to me, pleased to see me shun him as I did, that the poet's observation was too true; that the generality of ladies were rakes in their hearts, or they could not be so much taken with a man who had so notorious a character. I told him the reflection both of the poet and applier was much too general, and made with more ill nature than good manners. When the wretch saw how industriously I avoided him, shifting from one part of the hall to another, he at last boldly stept up to me, as my mother and Mr. Hickman were talking to me, and thus before them accosted me: I beg your pardon, Madam, but by your mother's leave, I must have a few moments' conversation with you, either here or at your own house, and I beg you will give me the opportunity. Nancy, said my mother, hear what he has to say to you. In my presence you may, and better in the adjoining apartment, if it must be, than to come to you at our own house. I retired to one corner of the hall, my mother following me, and he, taking Mr. Hickman under his arm, following her. Well, Sir, said I, what have you to say? Tell me here. I have been telling Mr. Hickman, said he, how much I am concerned for the injuries I have done to the most excellent woman in the world; and yet, that she obtained such a glorious triumph over me the last time I had the honour to see her, as, with my penitence, ought to have abated her former resentments; but that I will, with all my soul, enter into any measures to obtain her forgiveness of me. My cousins Montague have told you this. Lady Betty and Lady Sarah and my Lord M. are engaged for my honour. I know your power with the dear creature. My cousins told me you gave them hopes you would use it in my behalf. My Lord M. and his 2 sisters are impatiently expecting the fruits of it. You must have heard from her before now. I hope you have. And will you be so good as to tell me, if I may have any hopes? If I must speak on this subject, let me tell you, that you have broken her heart. You know not the value of the lady you have injured. You deserve her not, and she despises you, as she ought. Dear Miss Howe, mingle not passion with denunciations so severe. I must know my fate. I will go abroad once more, if I find her absolutely irreconcilable. But I hope she will give me leave to attend upon her, to know my doom from her own mouth. It would be death immediate for her to see you. And what must you be, to be able to look her in the face? I then reproached him, with vehemence enough you may believe, on his baseness, and the evils he had made you suffer, the distress he had reduced you to, all your friends made your enemies, the vile house he had carried you to, hinted at his villanous arts, the dreadful arrest, and told him of your present deplorable illness, and resolution to die rather than to have him. He vindicated not any part of his conduct but that of the arrest, and so solemnly protested his sorrow for his usage of you, accusing himself in the freest manner, and by deserved appellations, that I promised to lay before you this part of our conversation, and now you have it. My mother, as well as Mr. Hickman, believes, from what passed on this occasion, that he is touched in conscience for the wrongs he has done you: but by his whole behaviour, I must own, it seems to me that nothing can touch him for half an hour together. Yet I have no doubt that he would willingly marry you; and it piques his pride, I could see, that he should be denied. as it did mine, that such a wretch had dared to think it in his power to have such a woman whenever he pleased, and that it must be accounted a condescension, a matter of obligation, by all his own family at least, that he would vouchsafe to think of marriage. Now, my dear, you have before you the reason why I suspend the decisive negative to the ladies of his family. My mother, Miss Lloyd, and Miss Biddulph, who were inquisitive after the subject of our retired conversation, and whose curiosity I thought it was right in some degree to gratify, especially as these young ladies are of our select acquaintance, are all of opinion that you should be his. You will let Mr. Hickman know your whole mind, and when he acquaint me with it, I will tell you all my own. Mean time, may the news he will bring me of the state of your health be favourable. Prays, with the utmost fervency, your ever faithful and affectionate Anna Howe. End of Letter 49. Letter 50 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson, Letter 50. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Miss Howe, Thursday, July 27. My dearest Miss Howe, after I have thankfully acknowledged your favour in sending Mr. Hickman to visit me before you set out upon your intended journey, I must chide you, in the sincerity of that faithful love, which could not be the love it is, if it would not admit of that cementing freedom, for suspending the decisive negative which, upon such full deliberation, I had entreated you to give to Mr. Lovelace's relations. I am sorry that I am obliged to repeat to you, my dear, who know me so well, that, were I sure I should live many years, I would not have Mr. Lovelace, much less can I think of him, as it is probable I may not live one. As to the world and its censures, you know, my dear, that however desirous I always was of a fair fame, yet I never thought it right to give more than a second place to the world's opinion. The challenges made to Mr. Lovelace by Miss D'Oyley in public company are a fresh proof that I have lost my reputation. And what advantage would it be to me, were it retrievable, and were I to live long, if I could not acquit myself to myself? Having in my former said so much on the freedoms you have taken with my friends, I shall say the less now. But your hint, that something else has newly passed between some of them and you, gives me great concern, and that as well for my own sake as for theirs, since it must necessarily incense them against me. I wish, my dear, that I had been left to my own course on an occasion so very interesting to myself. But, since what is done cannot be helped, I must abide the consequences. Yet I dread, more than before, what may be my sister's answer, if an answer will be at all vouchsafed. Will you give me leave, my dear, to close this subject with one remark? It is this, that my beloved friend, in points where her own laudable zeal is concerned, has ever seemed more ready to fly from the rebuke than from the fault. If you will excuse this freedom, I will acknowledge thus far in favour of your way of thinking, as to the conduct of some parents in these nice cases, that indiscreet opposition does frequently as much mischief as giddy love. As to the invitation you are so kind as to give me, to remove privately into your neighbourhood, I have told Mr. Hickman that I will consider of it, but believe, if you will be so good as to excuse me, that I shall not accept of it, even should I be able to remove. I will give you my reasons for declining it, and so I ought, when both my love and my gratitude would make a visit now and then from my dear Miss Howe the most consolate thing in the world to me. You must know then that this great town, wicked as it is, wants not opportunities of being better, having daily prayers at several churches in it, and I am desirous, as my strength will permit, to embrace those opportunities. The method I have proposed to myself, and was beginning to practise when that cruel arrest deprived me of both freedom and strength, is this. When I was disposed to gentle exercise, I took a chair to St. Dunstan's Church in Fleet Street, where are prayers at 7 in the morning. I proposed, if the weather favoured, to walk; if not, to take chair, to Lincoln's Inn Chapel, where, at 11 in the morning, and at 5 in the afternoon, are the same desirable opportunities; and at other times to go no further than Covent Garden Church, where are early morning prayers likewise. This method pursued, I doubt not, will greatly help, as it has already done, to calm my disturbed thoughts, and to bring me to that perfect resignation after which I aspire. For I must own, my dear, that sometimes still my griefs and my reflections are too heavy for me, and all the aid I can draw from religious duties is hardly sufficient to support my staggering reason. I am a very young creature, you know, my dear, to be left to my own conduct in such circumstances as I am in. Another reason why I choose not to go down into your neighbourhood is the displeasure that might arise on my account between your mother and you. If indeed you were actually married, and the worthy man, who would then have a title to all your regard, were earnestly desirous of near neighbourhood, I know not what I might do. For although I might not perhaps intend to give up my other important reasons at the time I should make you a congratulatory visit, yet I might not know how to deny myself the pleasure of continuing near you when there. I send you enclosed the copy of my letter to my sister. I hope it will be thought to be written with a true penitent spirit, for indeed it is. I desire that you will not think I stoop too low in it, since there can be no such thing as that in a child to parents whom she has unhappily offended. But if still, perhaps more disgusted than before at your freedom with them, they should pass it by with the contempt of silence, for I have not yet been favoured with an answer, I must learn to think it right in them to do so, especially as it is my first direct application: for I have often censured the boldness of those who, applying for a favour, which it is in a person's option to grant or refuse, take the liberty of being offended, if they are not gratified, as if the petitioned had not as good a right to reject as the petitioner to ask. But if my letter should be answered, and that in such terms as will make me loath to communicate it to so warm a friend, you must not, my dear, take it upon yourself to censure my relations, but allow for them as they know not what I have suffered, as being filled with just resentments against me, just to them if they think them just, and as not being able to judge of the reality of my penitence. And after all, what can they do for me? They can only pity me: and what will that but augment their own grief, to which at present their resentment is an alleviation? For can they by their pity restore to me my lost reputation? Can they by it purchase a sponge that will wipe out from the year the past fatal 4 months of my life? Your account of the gay, unconcerned behaviour of Mr. Lovelace at the Colonel's does not surprise me at all, after I am told that he had the intrepidity to go there, knowing who were invited and expected. Only this, my dear, I really wonder at, that Miss Howe could imagine that I could have a thought of such a man for a husband. Poor wretch! I pity him, to see him fluttering about, abusing talents that were given him for excellent purposes, taking in consideration for courage, and dancing fearless of danger on the edge of a precipice. But indeed his threatening to see me most sensibly alarms and shocks me. I cannot but hope that I never, never more shall see him in this world. Since you are so loth, my dear, to send the desired negative to the ladies of his family, I will only trouble you to transmit the letter I shall enclose for that purpose, directed indeed to yourself, because it was to you that those ladies applied themselves on this occasion, but to be sent by you to any one of the ladies at your own choice. I commend myself, my dearest Miss Howe, to your prayers, and conclude with repeated thanks for sending Mr. Hickman to me, and with wishes for your health and happiness, and for the speedy celebration of your nuptials. Your ever affectionate and obliged Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 50. Letter 51 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 51. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Miss Howe. Thursday, July 27th. My dearest Miss Howe, since you seem loth to acquiesce in my determined resolution, signified to you as soon as I was able to hold a pen, I beg the favour of you by this, or by any other way you think most proper, to acquaint the worthy ladies who have applied to you in behalf of their relation, that although I am infinitely obliged to their generous opinion of me, yet I cannot consent to sanctify, as I may say, Mr. Lovelace's repeated breaches of all moral sanctions, and hazard my future happiness by a union with a man through whose premeditated injuries, in a long train of the basest contrivances, I have forfeited my temporal hopes. He himself, when he reflects upon his own actions, must surely bear testimony to the justice as well as fitness of my determination. The ladies, I dare say, would, were they to know the whole of my unhappy story. Be pleased to acquaint them that I deceive myself, if my resolution on this head, however ungratefully and even inhumanly he has treated me, be not owing more to principle than passion. Nor can I give a stronger proof of the truth of this assurance on this one easy condition, that he will never molest me more. In whatever way you choose to make this declaration, be pleased to let my most respectful compliments to the ladies of that noble family, and to my Lord M. accompany it. And do you, my dear, believe, that I shall be, to the last moment of my life, your ever obliged and affectionate Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 51. LETTER LII of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 52. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. Friday, July 28. I have 3 letters of thine to take notice of. But am divided in my mind, whether to quarrel with thee on thy unmerciful reflections, or to thank thee for thy acceptable particularity and diligence. But several of my sweet dears have I indeed in my time made to cry and laugh before the cry could go off the other. Why may I not, therefore, curse and applaud thee in the same moment? So take both in one, and what follows, as it shall rise from my pen. How often have I ingenuously confessed my sins against this excellent creature! Yet thou never sparest me, although as bad a man as myself. Since then I get so little by my confessions, I had a good mind to try to defend myself, and that not only from ancient and modern story, but from common practice, and yet avoid repeating any thing I have suggested before in my own behalf. I am in a humour to play the fool with my pen. Briefly then, from ancient story first, dost thou not think that I am as much entitled to forgiveness on Miss Harlowe's account as Virgil's hero was on Queen Dido's? For what an ungrateful varlet was that vagabond to the hospitable princess, who had willingly conferred upon him the last favour! Stealing away, whence, I suppose, the ironical phrase of trusty Trojan to this day, like a thief, pretendedly indeed at the command of the gods. But could that be, when the errand he went upon was to rob other princes, not only of their dominions, but of their lives? Yet this fellow is, at every word, the pious Aeneas, with the immortal bard who celebrates him. Should Miss Harlowe even break her heart, which Heaven forbid, for the usage she has received, to say nothing of her disappointed pride, to which her death would be attributable more than to reason, what comparison will her fate hold to Queen Dido's? And have I half the obligation to her that Aeneas had to the Queen of Carthage? The latter placing a confidence, the former none, in her man. Then whom else have I robbed? Whom else have I injured? Her brother's worthless life I gave him, instead of taking any man's, while the Trojan vagabond destroyed his thousands. Why then should it not be the pious Lovelace, as well as the pious Aeneas? For dost thou think, had a conflagration happened, and had it been in my power, that I would not have saved my old Anchises, as he did his from the Ilian bonfire, even at the expense of my Creusa, had I a wife of that name? But for a more modern instance in my favour, have I used Miss Harlowe, as our famous maiden queen, as she was called, used one of her own blood, a sister queen, who threw herself into her protection from her rebel subjects, and whom she detained prisoner 18 years, and at last cut off her head? Yet do not honest Protestants pronounce her pious too, and call her particularly their queen? As to common practice, who, let me ask, that has it in his power to gratify a predominant passion, be it what it will, denies himself the gratification, leaving it to cooler deliberation, and, if he be a great man, to his flatterers, to find a reason for it afterwards? Then, as to the worst part of my treatment of this lady, how many men are there who, as well as I, have sought, by intoxicating liquors, first to inebriate, then to subdue? What signifies what the potations were, when the same end was in view? Let me tell thee, upon the whole, that neither the Queen of Carthage, nor the Queen of Scots, would have thought they had any reason to complain of cruelty, had they been used no worse than I have used the queen of my heart. And then do I not aspire with my whole soul to repair by marriage? Would the pious Aeneas, thinkest thou, have done such a piece of justice by Dido, had she lived? Come, come, Belford, let people run away with notions as they will. I am comparatively a very innocent man. And if by these, and other like reasonings, I have quieted my own conscience, a great end is answered. What have I to do with the world? And now I sit me peaceably down to consider thy letters. I hope thy pleas in my favour, when she gave thee, so generously gave thee, for me my letters, were urged with an honest energy. But I suspect thee much for being too ready to give up thy client. Then thou hast such a misgiving aspect, an aspect rather inviting rejection than carrying persuasion with it, and art such an hesitating, such a humming and hawing caitiff, that I shall attribute my failure, if I do fail, rather to the inability and ill looks of my advocate, than to my cause. Again, thou art deprived of the force men of our cast give to arguments, for she won't let thee swear. Art, moreover, a very heavy, thoughtless fellow, tolerable only at a second rebound, a horrid dunce at the impromptu. These, encountering with such a lady, are great disadvantages; and still a greater is thy balancing, as thou dost at present, between old rakery and new reformation. Since this puts thee into the same situation with her as they told me, at Leipzig, Martin Luther was in, at the first public dispute which he held in defence of his supposed new doctrines with Eckius. For Martin was then but a linsey-wolsey reformer. he retained some dogmas, which by natural consequence made others, that he held, untenable; so that Eckius, in some points, had the better of him: but from that time he made clear work, renouncing all that stood in his way, and then his doctrines ran upon all fours. He was never puzzled afterwards, and could boldly declare that he would defend them in the face of angels and men; and to his friends, who would have dissuaded him from venturing to appear before the Emperor Charles at Spires, that, were there as many devils at Spires as tiles upon the houses, he would go: an answer that is admired by every Protestant Saxon to this day. Since then thy unhappy awkwardness destroys the force of thy arguments, I think thou hadst better, for the present, however, forbear to urge her on the subject of accepting the reparation I offer, lest the continual teasing of her to forgive me should but strengthen her in her denials of forgiveness, till for consistency's sake she'll be forced to adhere to a resolution so often avowed: whereas, if left to herself, a little time, and better health, which will bring on better spirits, will give her quicker resentments; those quicker resentments will lead her into vehemence; that vehemence will subside, and turn into expostulations and parley; my friends will then interpose and guarantee for me, and all our trouble on both sides will be over. Such is the natural course of things. I cannot endure thee for thy hopelessness in the lady's recovery, and that in contradiction to the doctor and apothecary. Time, in the words of Congreve, thou sayest, will give increase to her afflictions. But why so? Knowest thou not that those words, so contrary to common experience, were applied to the case of a person while passion was in its full vigour? At such a time, every one in a heavy grief thinks the same. But as enthusiasts do by Scripture, so dost thou by the poets thou hast read. Any thing that carries the most distant allusion from either to the case in hand is put down by both for gospel, however incongruous to the general scope of either, and to that case. So once in a pulpit I heard one of the former very vehemently declare himself to be a dead dog, when every man, woman, and child were convinced to the contrary by his howling. I can tell thee that, if nothing else will do, I am determined, in spite of thy buskin airs, and of thy engagements for me to the contrary, to see her myself. Face to face have I known many a quarrel made up, which distance would have kept alive and widened. Thou wilt be a madder Jack than he in the tail of a tub, if thou givest an active opposition to this interview. In short, I cannot bear the thought that a woman whom once I had bound to me in the silken cords of love should slip through my fingers, and be able, while my heart flames out with a violent passion for her, to despise me, and to set both love and me at defiance. Thou canst not imagine how much I envy thee, and her doctor, and her apothecary, and every one who I hear are admitted to her presence and conversation, and wish to be the one or the other in turn. Wherefore, if nothing else will do, I will see her. I'll tell thee of an admirable expedient just come cross me, to save thy promise and my own. Mrs. Lovick, you say, is a good woman. If the lady be worse, you shall advise her to send for a parson to pray by her. Unknown to her, unknown to the lady, unknown to thee, for so it may pass, I will contrive to be the man, petticoated out, and vested in a gown and cassock. I once, for a certain purpose, did assume the canonicals, and I was thought to make a fine sleek appearance. My broad rose-bound heaver became me mightily, and I was much admired upon the whole by all who saw me. Methinks it must be charmingly apropos to see me kneeling down by her bedside. I am sure I shall pray heartily, beginning out of the common prayer book for the sick office, for the restoration of the languishing lady, and concluding with an exhortation to charity and forgiveness for myself. I will consider of this matter. But in whatever shape I shall choose to appear, of this thou mayest assure thyself: I will apprize thee beforehand of my visit, that thou mayest contrive to be out of the way, and to know nothing of the matter. This will save thy word; and, as to mine, can she think worse of me than she does at present? An indispensable of true love and profound respect, in thy wise opinion, is absurdity or awkwardness. 'Tis surprising that thou shouldst be one of those partial mortals who take their measures of right and wrong from what they find themselves to be, and cannot help being. So awkwardness is a perfection in the awkward. At this rate, no man can ever be in the wrong. But I insist upon it, that an awkward fellow will do every thing awkwardly; and if he be like thee, will, when he has done foolishly, rack his unmeaning brain for excuses as awkward as his first fault. Respectful love is an inspirer of actions worthy of itself; and he who cannot show it, where he most means it, manifests that he is an unpolite rough creature, a perfect Belford, and has it not in him. But here thou'lt throw out that notable witticism, that my outside is the best of me, thine the worst of thee; and that, if I set about mending my mind, thou wilt mend thy appearance. But pr'ythee, Jack, don't stay for that; but set about thy amendment in dress when thou leavest off thy mourning: for why shouldst thou prepossess in thy disfavour all those who never saw thee before? It is hard to remove early taken prejudices, whether of liking or distaste. People will hunt, as I may say, for reasons to confirm first impressions, in compliment to their own sagacity. Nor is it every mind that has the ingenuousness to confess itself half mistaken, when it finds itself to be wrong. Thou thyself art an adept in the pretended science of reading men; and whenever thou art out, wilt study to find some reasons why it was more probable that thou shouldst have been right, and wilt watch every motion and action, and every word and sentiment in the person thou hast once censured, for proofs, in order to help thee to revive and maintain thy first opinion. And indeed, as thou seldom errest on the favourable side, human nature is so vile a thing that thou art likely to be right 5 times in 6 on what thou findest in thine own heart to have reason to compliment thyself on thy penetration. Here is preachment for thy preachment; and I hope, if thou likest thy own, thou wilt thank me for mine, the rather, as thou mayest be the better for it if thou wilt, since it is calculated for thy own meridian. Well, but the lady refers my destiny to the letter she has written, actually written, to Miss Howe, to whom it seems she has given her reasons why she will not have me. I long to know the contents of this letter; but am in great hopes that she has so expressed her denials as shall give room to think she only wants to be persuaded to the contrary, in order to reconcile herself to herself. I could make some pretty observations upon 1 or 2 places of the lady's mediation; but, wicked as I am thought to be, I never was so abandoned as to turn into ridicule, or even to treat with levity, things sacred. I think it the highest degree of ill manners to jest upon those subjects which the world in general look upon with veneration, and call divine. I would not even treat the mythology of the heathen to a heathen, with the ridicule that perhaps would fairly lie from some of the absurdities that strike every common observer. Nor, when at Rome, and in other popish countries, did I ever behave indecently at those ceremonies which I thought very extraordinary. For I saw some people affected and seemingly edified by them; and I contented myself to think, though they were any good end to the many, there was religion enough in them, or civil policy at least, to exempt them from the ridicule of even a bad man who had common sense and good manners. For the like reason, I have never given noisy or tumultuous instances of dislike to a new play, if I thought it ever so indifferent; for I concluded first that every one was entitled to see quietly what he paid for; and next, as the theatre, the epitome of the world, consisted of pit, boxes, and gallery, it was hard, I thought, if there could be such a performance exhibited as would not please somebody in that mixed multitude; and if it did, those somebodies had as much right to enjoy their own judgments undisturbedly as I had to enjoy mine. This was my way of showing my disapprobation. I never went again; and as a man is at his option whether he will go to a play or not, he has not the same excuse for expressing his dislike clamorously, as if he were compelled to see it. I have ever, thou knowest, declared against those shallow libertines, who could not make out their pretensions to wit but on 2 subjects, to which every man of true wit will scorn to be beholden: profaneness and obscenity, I mean, which must shock the ears of every man or woman of sense, without answering any end, but of showing a very low and abandoned nature. And till I came acquainted with the brutal Mowbray, no great praise to myself from such a tutor, I was far from making so free as I do now with oaths and curses; for then I was forced to outswear him sometimes, in order to keep him in his allegiance to me his general. Nay, I often check myself to myself, for this empty unprofitable liberty of speech, in which we are outdone by the sons of the common sewer. All my vice is women, and the love of plots and intrigues; and I cannot but wonder how I fell into those shocking freedoms of speech, since, generally speaking, they are far from helping forward my main end. Only now and then, indeed, a little novice rises to one's notice, who seems to think dress, and oaths, and curses, the diagnostics of the rakish spirit she is inclined to favour. And indeed they are the only qualifications that some who are called rakes and pretty fellows have to boast of. But what must the women be, who can be attracted by such empty-souled profligates, since wickedness with wit is hardly tolerable, but without it is equally shocking and contemptible? There again is preachment for thy preachment; and thou wilt be apt to think that I am reforming too: but no such matter. If this were new light darting in upon me, as thy morality seems to be to thee, something of this kind might be apprehended. But this was always my way of thinking; and I defy thee, or any of thy brethren, to name a time when I have either ridiculed religion, or talked obscenely. On the contrary, thou knowest how often I have checked that bear in love matters, Mowbray, and the finical Tourville, and thyself too, for what ye have called the double entendre. In love, as in points that required a manly resentment, it has always been my maxim to act, rather than to talk; and I do assure thee, as to the first, the women themselves will excuse the one sooner than the other. As to the admiration thou expressed for the books of Scripture, thou art certainly right in it; but 'tis strange to me that thou wert ignorant of their beauty and noble simplicity till now. Their antiquity always made me reverence them. And how was it possible that thou couldest not, for that reason, if for no other, give them a perusal? I'll tell thee a short story which I had from my tutor, admonishing me against exposing myself by ignorant wonder, when I should quit college, to go to town or travel. The first time Dryden's Alexander's Feast fell into his hands, he told me, he was prodigiously charmed with it, and having never heard any body speak of it before, thought, as thou dost of the Bible, that he had made a new discovery. He hastened to an appointment which he had with several wits, for he was then in town, one of whom was a noted critic, who, according to him, had more merit than good fortune; for all the little nibblers in wit whose writings would not stand the test of criticism made it, he said, a common cause to run him down, as men would a mad dog. The young gentleman, for young he then was, set forth magnificently in the praises of that inimitable performance, and gave himself airs of second-hand merit for finding out its beauties. The old bard heard him out with a smile, which the collegian took for approbation, till he spoke, and then it was in these mortifying words: 'Sdeath, Sir, where have you lived till now, or with what sort of company have you conversed, young as you are, that you have never before heard of the finest piece in the English language?' This story had such an effect upon me, who had ever a proud heart, and wanted to be thought a clever fellow, that, in order to avoid the like disgrace, I laid down 2 rules to myself: the first, whenever I went into company where there were strangers, to hear every one of them speak, before I gave myself liberty to prate; the other, if I found any of them above my match, to give up all title to new discoveries, contenting myself to praise what they praised, as beauties familiar to me, though I had never heard of them before. And so by degrees I got the reputation of a wit myself; and when I threw off all restraint, and books, and learned conversation, and fell in with some of our brethren who are now wandering in Erebus, and with such others as Belton, Mowbray, Tourville, and thyself, I set up on my own stock, and, like what we have been told of Sir Richard in his latter days, valued myself on being the emperor of the company, for having fathomed the depth of them all, and afraid of no rival but thee, whom also I had got a little under, by my gaiety and promptitude at least, I proudly, like Addison's Cato, delighted to give laws to my little senate. Proceed with thee by and by. End of Letter LII. Letter LIII of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter LIII. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. But now I have cleared myself of any intentional levity on occasion of my beloved's meditation, which, as you observe, is finely suited to her case, that is to say, as she and you have drawn her case, I cannot help expressing my pleasure, that by 1 or 2 verses of it, the arrow jack, and what she feared being come upon her, I am encouraged to hope, what it will be very surprising to me if it do not happen, that is, in plain English, that the dear creature is in the way to be a mamma. This cursed arrest, because of the ill effects the terror might have had upon her in that hoped-for circumstance, has concerned me more than on any other account. It would be the pride of my life to prove, in this charming frost-piece, the triumph of nature over principle, and to have a young Lovelace by such an angel; and then, for its sake, I am confident she will live, and will legitimate it. And what a meritorious little cherub would it be, that should lay an obligation upon both parents before it was born, which neither of them would be able to repay? Could I be sure it is so, I should be out of all pain for her recovery. Pain, I say, since were she to die, die! Abominable word! How I hate it! I verily think I should be the most miserable man in the world. As for the earnestness she expresses for death, she has found the words ready to her hand in honest Job, else she would not have delivered herself with such strength and vehemence. Her innate piety, as I have more than once observed, will not permit her to shorten her own life, either by violence or neglect. She has a mind too noble for that, and would have done it before now, had she designed any such thing. For to do it like the Roman matron when the mischief is over, and it can serve no end, and when the man, however a Tarquin, as some may think me in this action, is not a Tarquin in power, so that no national point can be made of it, is what she has too much good sense to think of. Then, as I observed in a like case a little while ago, the distress, when this was written, was strong upon her, and she saw no end of it, but all was darkness and apprehension before her. Moreover, has she it not in her power to disappoint, as much as she has been disappointed? Revenge, Jack, has induced many a woman to cherish a life to which grief and despair would otherwise have put an end. And after all, death is no such eligible thing, as Job in his calamities makes it. And a death desired merely from worldly disappointments shows not a right mind, let me tell this lady, whatever she may think of it. You and I, Jack, although not afraid, in the height of passion or resentment, to rush into those dangers which might be followed by a sudden and violent death, whenever a point of honour calls upon us, would shudder at his cool and deliberate approach in a lingering sickness which had debilitated the spirits. So we read of a famous French general, I forget as well the reign of the prince as the name of the man, who, having faced with intrepidity the ghastly varlet on 100 occasions in the field, was the most dejected of wretches when, having forfeited his life for treason, he was led with all the cruel parade of preparation and surrounding guards to the scaffold. The poet says well, "'Tis not the stoic lesson got by rote, the pomp of words and pedant dissertation, that can support us in the hour of terror. Books have taught cowards to talk nobly of it, but when the trial comes, they start and stand aghast." Very true, for then it is the old man in the fable with his bundle of sticks. The lady is well read in Shakespeare, our English pride and glory, and must sometimes reason with herself in his words, so greatly expressed, that the subject, affecting as it is, cannot produce any thing greater. Ay, but to die, and go we know not where; to lie in cold obstruction, and to rot; this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clod; and the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling regions of thick-ribbed ice; to be imprisoned in the viewless winds, or blown with restless violence about the pendant worlds; or to be worse than worst of those that lawless and uncertain thought imagines howling; 'tis too horrible. The weariest and most loaded worldly life, that pain, age, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature, is a paradise to what we fear of death. I find by one of thy 3 letters that my beloved had some account from Hickman of my interview with Miss Howe at Colonel Ambrose's. I had a very agreeable time of it there, although severely rallied by several of the assembly. It concerns me, however, not a little, to find our affair so generally known among the flippanti of both sexes. It is all her own fault. There never surely was such an odd little soul as this, not to keep her own secret when the revealing of it could answer no possible good end, and when she wants not, one would think, to raise to herself either pity or friends, or to me enemies, by the proclamation. Why, Jack, must not all her own sex laugh in their sleeves at her weakness? What would become of the peace of the world, if all women should take it into their heads to follow her example? What a fine time of it would the heads of families have! Their wives always filling their ears with their confessions, their daughters with theirs; sisters would be every day setting their brothers about cutting of throats, if the brothers had at heart the honour of their families, as it is called; and the whole world would either be a scene of confusion, or cuckoldom as much the fashion as it is in Lithuania. In Lithuania the women are said to have so allowedly their gallants, called adjutores, that the husbands hardly ever enter upon any part of pleasure without them. I am glad, however, that Miss Howe, as much as she hates me, kept her word with my cousins on their visit to her, and with me at the Colonel's, to endeavour to persuade her friend to make up all matters by matrimony, which no doubt is the best, nay, the only method she can take for her own honour and that of her family. I had once thoughts of revenging myself on that vixen, and particularly, as thou mayest remember, had planned something to this purpose on the journey she is going to take, which had been talked of some time. But I think, let me see, yet I think I will let this Hickman have her safe and entire, as thou believest the fellow to be a tolerable sort of a mortal, and that I have made the worst of him; and I am glad, for his own sake, he has not launched out too virulently against me to thee. But thou seest, Jack, by her refusal of money from him, or Miss Howe, that the dear extravagant takes a delight in oddnesses, choosing to part with her clothes, though for a song. Dost think she is not a little touched at times? I am afraid she is. A little spice of that insanity, I doubt, runs through her, that she had in a stronger degree in the first week of my operations. Her contempt of life, her proclamations, her refusal of matrimony, and now of money from her most intimate friends, are sprinklings of this kind, and no other way, I think, to be accounted for. Her apothecary is a good honest fellow. I like him much. But the silly dear's harping so continually upon one string, dying, 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 is what I have no patience with. I hope all this melancholy jargon is owing entirely to the way I would have her to be in; and it being as new to her as the Bible beauties to thee, no wonder she knows not what to make of herself, and so fancies she is breeding death, when the event will turn out quite the contrary. Thou art a sorry fellow in thy remarks on the education and qualification of smarts and beaux of the rakish order, if by thy we's and us's thou meanest thyself or me: for I pretend to say that the picture has no resemblance of us, who have read and conversed as we have done. It may indeed, and I believe it does, resemble the generality of the fops and coxcombs about town: but that let them look to; for if it affects not me, to what purpose thy random shot? If indeed thou findest, by the new light darted in upon thee, since thou hast had the honour of conversing with this admirable creature, that the cap fits thy own head, Why then, according to the qui capit rule, e'en take and clap it on, and I will add a string of bells to it, to complete thee for the forehorse of the idiot team. Although I just now said a kind thing or two for this fellow Hickman, yet I can tell thee, I could, to use one of my noble peer's humble phrases, eat him up without a corn of salt, when I think of his impudence to salute my charmer twice at parting; and have still less patience with the lady herself, for presuming to offer her cheek or lip, thou sayest not which, to him, and to press his clumsy fist between her charming hands. An honour worth a king's ransom, and what I would give, what would I not give, to have? And then he in return to press her, as thou sayest he did, to his stupid heart, at that time no doubt more sensible than ever it was before. By thy description of their parting, I see thou wilt be a delicate fellow in time. My mortification in this lady's displeasure will be thy exaltation from her conversation. I envy thee as well for thy opportunities as for thy improvements; and such an impression has thy concluding paragraph made upon me, that I wish I do not get into Reformation humour as well as thou. And then what a couple of lamentable puppies shall we make, howling and recitative, to each other's discordant music! Let me improve upon the thought, and imagine that, turned hermits, we have opened the 2 old caves at Hornsey, or dug new ones, and in each of our cells set up a death's head and an hour-glass for objects of contemplation. I have seen such a picture. But then, Jack, had not the old penitent fornicator a suffocating long grey beard? What figures would a couple of brocaded or laced waistcoated toupees make, with their sour, screwed-up, half-cocked faces, and more than half-shut eyes, in a kneeling attitude, recapitulating their respective rogueries? This scheme, were we only to make trial of it, and return afterwards to our old ways, might serve to better purpose by far than Horner's in the Country Wife, to bring the pretty wenches to us. Let me see. The author of Hudibras has somewhere a description that would suit us, when met in one of our caves, and comparing our dismal notes together. This is it. Suppose me described. He sat upon his rump, his head like one in doleful dump, betwixt his knees his hands applied unto his cheeks on either side, and by him in another hole sat stupid Belford, cheek by jowl. I know thou wilt think me too ludicrous. I think myself so. It is truly, to be ingenuous, a forced put; for my passions are so wound up, that I am obliged either to laugh or cry. Like honest drunken Jack Daventry, poor fellow, what an unhappy end was his! Thou knowest I used to observe, that whenever he rose from an entertainment, which he never did sober, it was his way, as soon as he got to the door, to look round him like a carrier pigeon just thrown up, in order to spy out his course; and then taking to his heels, he would run all the way home, though it were a mile or 2, when he could hardly stand, and must have tumbled on his nose, if he had attempted to walk moderately. This then must be my excuse, in this my unconverted estate, for a conclusion so unworthy of the conclusion to thy 3rd letter. What a length have I run! Thou wilt own, that if I pay thee not in quality, I do in quantity; and yet I leave a multitude of things unobserved upon. Indeed, I hardly at this present know what to do with myself but scribble. Tired with Lord M., who in his recovery has played upon me the fable of the nurse, the crying child, and the wolf; tired with my cousins Montague, though charming girls, were they not so near of kin; tired with Mowbray and Tourville and their everlasting identity; tired with the country; tired of myself; longing for what I have not, I must go to town, and there have an interview with the charmer of my soul; for desperate diseases must have desperate remedies, and I only wait to know my doom from Miss Howe; and then, if it be rejection, I will try my fate, and receive my sentence at her feet. But I will apprize thee of it beforehand, as I told thee, that thou mayest keep thy parole with the lady in the best manner thou canst. End of Letter 53. Letter 54 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 54. Miss Howe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Friday night, July 28. I will now, my dearest friend, write to you all my mind, without reserve, on your resolution not to have this vilest of men. You gave me, in yours of Sunday, the 23rd, reasons so worthy of the pure mind of my Clarissa, in support of this your resolution, that nothing but self-love, lest I should lose my ever amiable friend, could have prevailed upon me to wish you to alter it. Indeed, I thought it was impossible there could be, however desirable, so noble an instance given by any of our sex, of a passion conquered, when there were so many inducements to give way to it. And therefore I was willing to urge you once more to overcome your just indignation, and to be prevailed upon by the solicitations of his friends, before you carried your resentments to so great a height, that it would be more difficult for you, and less to your honour, to comply, than if you had complied at first. But now, my dear, that I see you fixed in your noble resolution, and that it is impossible for your pure mind to join itself with that of so perjured a miscreant, I congratulate you most heartily upon it, and beg your pardon for but seeming to doubt that theory and practice were not the same thing with my beloved Clarissa. I have only one thing that saddens my heart on this occasion, and that is, the bad state of health Mr. Hickman, unwillingly, owns you are in. Hitherto you have well observed the doctrine you always laid down to me, that a cursed person should first seek the world's opinion of her, and in all cases where the two could not be reconciled, have preferred the first to the last, and are, of consequence, well justified to your own heart, as well as to your Anna Howe. Let me therefore beseech you to endeavour, by all possible means, to recover your health and spirits, and this as what, if it can be effected, will crown the work, and show the world, that you were indeed got above the base wretch, and though put out of your course for a little while, could resume it again, and go on blessing all within your knowledge, as well by your example as by your precepts. For Heaven's sake, then, for the world's sake, for the honour of our sex, and for my sake, once more I beseech you, try to overcome this shock, and if you can overcome it, I shall then be as happy as I wish to be, for I cannot, indeed I cannot, think of parting with you for many, many years to come. The reasons you give for discouraging my wishes to have you near us are so convincing, that I ought at present to acquiesce in them. But, my dear, when your mind is fully settled, as, now you are so absolutely determined in it with regard this wretch, I hope it will soon be, I shall expect you with us, or near us, and then you shall chalk out every path that I will set my foot in, nor will I turn aside either to the right hand or to the left. You wish I had not mediated for you to your friends. I wish so too, because my mediation was ineffectual, because it may give new ground for the malice of some of them to work upon, and because you are angry with me for doing so. But how, as I said in my former, could I sit down in quiet, when I knew how uneasy their implacableness made you? But I will tear myself from the subject, for I see I shall be warm again, and displease you, and there is not one thing in the world that I would do, however agreeable to myself, if I thought it would disoblige you, nor any one that I would omit to do, if I knew it would give you pleasure. And indeed, my dear half-severe friend, I will try if I cannot avoid the fault as willingly as I would the rebuke. For this reason, I forbear saying any thing on so nice a subject as your letter to your sister. It must be right, because you think it so; and if it be taken as it ought, that will show you that it is. But if it beget insults and revilings, as it is but too likely, I find you don't intend to let me know it. You are always so ready to accuse yourself for other people's faults, and to suspect your own conduct rather than the judgment of your relations, that I have often told you I cannot imitate you in this. It is not a necessary point of belief with me, that all people in years are therefore wise, or that all young people are therefore rash and headstrong. It may be generally the case, as far as I know, and possibly it may be so in the case of my mother and her girl. But I will venture to say, that it has not yet appeared to be so between the principals of Harlowe place and their second daughter. You are for excusing them beforehand for their expected cruelty, as not knowing what you have suffered, nor how ill you are. They have heard of the former, and are not sorry for it. Of the latter they have been told, and I have most reason to know how they have taken it. But I shall be far from avoiding the fault, and as surely shall incur the rebuke, if I say any more upon this subject. I will therefore only add at present, that your reasonings in their behalf show you to be all excellence. Their returns to you, that they are all— Do, my dear, let me end with a little bit of spiteful justice. But you won't, I know. So I have done, quite done, however reluctantly. Yet if you think of the word I would have said, don't doubt the justice of it, and fill up the blank with it. You intimate that were I actually married and Mr. Hickman to desire it, you would think of obliging me with a visit on the occasion; that, perhaps, when with me, it would be difficult for you to remove far from me. Lord, my dear, what a stress do you seem to lay upon Mr. Hickman's desiring it! To be sure he does, and would of all things desire to have you near us and with us. If we might be so favoured, policy as well as veneration for you would undoubtedly make the man, if not a fool, desire this. But let me tell you, that if Mr. Hickman, after marriage, should pretend to dispute with me my friendships, as I hope I am not quite a fool, I should let him know how far his own quiet was concerned in such an impertinence, especially if they were such friendships as were contracted before I knew him. I know I always differed from you on this subject, for you think more highly of a husband's prerogative than most people do of the royal one. These notions, my dear, from a person of your sense and judgment, are no way advantageous to us, inasmuch as they justify the assuming sex in their insolence, when hardly 1 out of 10 of them, their opportunities considered, deserves any prerogative at all. Look through all the families we know, and we shall not find 1/3 of them have half the sense of their wives. And yet these are to be vested with prerogatives, and a woman of twice their sense has nothing to do but hear, tremble, and obey, and for conscience sake too, I warrant. But Mr. Hickman and I may perhaps have a little discourse upon these sorts of subjects, before I suffer him to talk of the day, and then I shall let him know what he has to trust to, as he will me, if he be a sincere man, what he pretends to expect from me. But let me tell you, my dear, that it is more in your power than perhaps you think it, to hasten the day so much pressed for by my mother, as well as wished for by you. For the very day that you can assure me that you are in a tolerable state of health, and have discharged your doctor and apothecary at their own motions on that account, some day in a month from that desirable news shall be it. So, my dear, make haste and be well, and then this matter will be brought to effect in a manner more agreeable to your Anna Howe than it otherwise ever can. I sent this day, by particular hand, to the Mrs. Montague, your letter of just reprobation of the greatest profligate in the kingdom, and hope I shall not have done amiss that I transcribe some of the paragraphs of your letter of the 23rd, and send them with it, as you at first intended should be done. You are, it seems, and that too much for your health, employed in writing. I hope it is in penning down the particulars of your tragical story, and my mother has put me in mind to press you to it, with a view that one day, if it might be published under feigned names, it would be as much use as honour to the sex. My mother says she cannot help admiring you for the propriety of your resentment of the wretch, and she would be extremely glad to have her advice of penning your sad story complied with. And then she says your noble conduct throughout your trials and calamities will afford not only a shining example to your sex, but at the same time, those calamities befalling such a person, a fearful warning to the inconsiderate young creatures of it. On Monday we shall set out on our journey, and I hope to be back in a fortnight, and on my return will have 1 pull more with my mother for a London journey. And if the pretence must be the buying of clothes, the principal motive will be that of seeing once more my dear friend, while I can say I have not finally given consent to the change of a visitor into a relation, and so can call myself my own, as well as your Anna Howe. End of Letter 54. Letter 55 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 55. Miss Howe, to the 2 Mrs. Montague, Saturday, July 29th. Dear Ladies, I have not been wanting to use all my interest with my beloved friend, to induce her to forgive and be reconciled to your kinsman, though he has so ill deserved it, and have even repeated my earnest advice to her on this head. This repetition, and the waiting for her answer, having taken up time, have been the cause that I could not sooner do myself the honour of writing to you on this subject. You will see by the enclosed her immovable resolution, grounded on noble and high-souled motives, which I cannot but regret and applaud at the same time. Applaud for the justice of her determination, which will confirm all your worthy house in the opinion you had conceived of her unequalled merit, and regret, because I have but too much reason to apprehend, as well by that as by the report of a gentleman just come from her, that she is in a declining way as to her health, and that her thoughts are very differently employed than on a continuance here. The enclosed letter she thought fit to send to me unsealed, that, after I had perused it, I might forward it to you, and this is the reason it is superscribed by myself, and sealed with my seal. It is very full and peremptory, but as she had been pleased, in a letter to me dated the 23rd instant, as soon as she could hold a pen, to give me more ample reasons why she could not comply with your pressing requests, as well as mine, I will transcribe some of the passages in that letter, which will give one of the wickedest men in the world, if he sees them, reason to think himself one of the most unhappy, in the loss of so incomparable a wife as he might have gloried in, had he not been so superlatively wicked. These are the passages. And now, ladies, you have before you my beloved friend's reasons for her refusal of a man unworthy of the relation he bears to so many excellent persons. And I will add, for I cannot help it, that the merit and rank of the person considered, and the vile manner of his proceedings, there never was a greater villany committed. And since she thinks her first and only fault cannot be expiated but by death, I pray to God daily, and will hourly from the moment I shall hear of that sad catastrophe, that he will be pleased to make him the subject of his vengeance in some such way as that all who know of his perfidious crime may see the hand of Heaven in the punishment of it. You will forgive me, ladies. I love not mine own soul better than I do Miss Clarissa Harlowe; and the distresses she has gone through, the persecution she suffers from all her friends, the curse she lies under, for his sake, from her implacable father, her reduced health and circumstances, from high health and affluence, and that execrable arrest and confinement, which have deepened all her other calamities, and which must be laid at his door, as it was the act of his vile agents, that, whether from his immediate orders or not, naturally flowed from his preceding baseness, the sex dishonoured in the eye of the world, in the person of one of the greatest ornaments of it, the unmanly methods, whatever they were, for I know not all as yet, by which he compassed her ruin, all these considerations joined to justify my warmth, and my execrations of a man whom I think excluded by his crimes from the benefit even of Christian forgiveness. And were you to see all she writes, and to know the admirable talent she is mistress of, you yourselves would join with me to admire her, and execrate him. Believe me to be, with a high sense of your merits, dear ladies, your most obedient and humble servant, Anna Howe. End of Letter 55. Letter 56 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 56. Mrs. Norton to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Friday, July 28. My dearest young lady, I have the consolation to tell you that my son is once again in a hopeful way as to his health. He desires his duty to you. He is very low and weak, and so am I. But this is the first time that I have been able for several days past to sit up to write, or I would not have been so long silent. Your letter to your sister is received and answered. You have the answer by this time, I suppose. I wish it may be to your satisfaction, but am afraid it will not. For by Betty Barnes I find they were in a great ferment on receiving yours, and much divided whether it should be answered or not. They will not yet believe that you are so ill, as, to my infinite concern, I find you are. What passed between Miss Harlowe and Miss Howe has been, as I feared it would be, an aggravation. I showed Betty 2 or 3 passages in your letter to me, and she seemed moved, and said she would report them favourably, and would procure me a visit from Miss Harlowe, if I would promise to show the same to her. But I have heard no more of that. Methinks I am sorry you refused the wicked man, but doubt not, nevertheless, that your motives for doing so are more commendable than my wishes that you would not. But as you would be resolved, as I may say, on life, if you gave way to such a thought, and as I have so much interest in your recovery, I cannot forbear showing this regard to myself, and to ask you, if you cannot get over your just resentments? But I dare say no more on this subject. What a dreadful thing indeed was it for my dearest, tender young lady to be arrested in the streets of London! How does my heart go over again and again for you, what yours must have suffered at that time! Yet this, to such a mind as yours, must be light, compared to what you had suffered before. O my dearest Miss Clary, how shall we know what to pray for when we pray, but that God's will may be done, and that we may be resigned to it? When at 9 years old, and afterwards at 11, you had a dangerous fever, how incessantly did we grieve, and pray, and put up our vows to the throne of grace for your recovery! For all our lives were bound up in your life. Yet now, my dear, as it has proved, especially if we are soon to lose you, what a much more desirable event, both for you and for us, would it have been, had we then lost you! A sad thing to say! But as it is in pure love to you that I say it, and in full conviction that we are not always fit to be our own choosers, I hope it may be excusable, and the rather as the same reflection will naturally lead both you and me to acquiesce under the dispensation, since we are assured that nothing happens by chance, and the greatest good may, for aught we know, be produced from the heaviest evils. I am glad you are with such honest people, and that you have all your effects restored. How dreadfully have you been used, that one should be glad of such a poor piece of justice as that! Your talent at moving the passions is always hinted at, and this Betty of your sister's never comes near me, that she is not full of it. But, as you say, whom has it moved that you wish to move? Yet, were it not for this unhappy notion, I am sure your mother would relent. Forgive me, my dear Miss Clary, for I must try one way to be convinced if my opinion be not just. But I will not tell you what that is, unless it succeeds. I will try, in pure duty and love to them, as to you. May Heaven be your support in all your trials! is the constant prayer, my dearest young lady, of your ever affectionate friend and servant, Judith Norton. End of Letter 56. Letter 57 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 57. Mrs. Norton to Mrs. Harlowe, Friday, July 28. Honoured Madam, being forbid, without leave, to send you any thing I might happen to receive from my beloved Miss Clary, and so ill that I cannot attend you to ask your leave, I give you this trouble to let you know that I have received a letter from her, which I think I should hereafter be held inexcusable, as things may happen, if I did not desire permission to communicate to you, and that as soon as possible. Applications have been made to the dear young lady from Lord M., from the two ladies his sisters, and from both his nieces, and from the wicked man himself, to forgive and marry him. This, in noble indignation for the usage she has received from him, she has absolutely refused. And perhaps, Madam, if you and the honoured family should be of opinion that to comply with their wishes is now the properest measure that can be taken, the circumstances of things may require your authority or advice to induce her to change her mind. I have reason to believe that one motive for her refusal is her full conviction that she shall not long be a trouble to any body, and so she would not give her husband a right to interfere with her family in relation to the estate her grandfather devised to her. But of this, however, I have not the least intimation from her, nor would she, I dare say, mention it as a reason, having still stronger reasons from his vile treatment of her, to refuse him. The letter I have received will show how truly penitent the dear creature is, and, if I have your permission, I will send it sealed up, with a copy of mine, to which it is an answer. But, as I resolve upon this step without her knowledge, and indeed I do, I will not acquaint her with it, unless it be attended with desirable effects, because otherwise, besides making me incur her displeasure, it might quite break her already half-broken heart. I am, honoured Madam, your dutiful and ever obliged servant, Judith Norton. End of Letter 57. Letter 58 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 58. Mrs. Harlowe to Mrs. Judith Norton, Sunday, July 30th. We all know your virtuous prudence, worthy woman, we all do. But your partiality to this your rash favourite is likewise known, and we are no less acquainted with the unhappy body's power of painting her distresses so as to pierce a stone. Every one is of opinion that the dear naughty creature is working about to be forgiven and received, and for this reason it is that Betty has been forbidden, not by me, you may be assured, to mention any more of her letters, for she did speak to my Bella of some moving passages you read to her. This will convince you that nothing will be heard in her favour. To what purpose, then, should I mention any thing about her? But you may be sure that I will, if I can have but 1 second. However, that is not at all likely, until we see what the consequences of her crime will be. And who can tell that? She may, how can I speak it, and my once darling daughter unmarried? She may be with child. This would perpetuate her stain. Her brother may come to some harm, which, God forbid. One child's ruin, I hope, will not be followed by another's murder. As to her grief and her present misery, whatever it be, she must bear with it, and it must be short of what I hourly bear for her. Indeed, I am afraid nothing but her being at the last extremity of all will make her father and her uncles and her other friends forgive her. The easy pardon perverse children meet with, when they have done the rashest and most rebellious thing they can do, is the reason, as is pleaded to us every day, that so many follow their example. They depend upon the indulgent weakness of their parents' tempers, and in that dependence harden their own hearts, and a little humiliation, when they have brought themselves into the foretold misery, is to be a sufficient atonement for the greatest perverseness. But for such a child as this, I mention what others hourly say, but what I must sorrowfully subscribe to lay plots and stratagems to deceive her parents as well as herself, and to run away with a libertine, can there be any atonement for her crime? And is she not answerable to God, to us, to you, and to all the world who knew her, for the abuse of such talents as she has abused? You say her heart is half broken. Is it to be wondered at? Was not her sin committed equally against warning and the light of her own knowledge? That he would now marry her, or that she would refuse him, if she believed him in earnest, as she has circumstanced herself, is not at all probable; and were I inclined to believe it, nobody else here would. He values not his relations, and would deceive them as soon as any others. His aversion to marriage he has always openly declared, and still occasionally declares it. But if he be now in earnest, which every one who knows him must doubt, which do you think, hating us too, as he professes to hate and despise us all, would be most eligible here? To hear of her death, or of her marriage to such a vile man? To all of us yet I cannot say. For, O my good Mrs. Norton, you know what a mother's tenderness for the child of her heart would make her choose, notwithstanding all that child's faults, rather than lose her for ever. But I must sail with the tide, my own judgment also joining with the general resentment, or I should make the unhappiness of the more worthy still greater, my dear Mr. Harlowe's particularly, which is already more than enough to make them unhappy for the remainder of their days. This I know, if I were to oppose the rest, our son would fly out to find this libertine, and who could tell what would be the issue of that with such a man of violence and blood as that Lovelace is known to be? All I can expect to prevail for her is, that in a week or so, Mr. Brand may be sent up to inquire privately about her present state and way of life, and to see she is not altogether destitute, for nothing she writes herself will be regarded. Her father indeed has, at her earnest request, withdrawn the curse which in a passion he laid upon her at her first wicked flight from us. But Miss Howe, it is a sad thing, Mrs. Norton, to suffer so many ways at once, had made matters so difficult by her undue liberties with us all, as well by speech in all companies, as by letters written to my Bella, that we could hardly prevail upon him to hear her letter read. These liberties of Miss Howe with us, the general cry against us abroad wherever we are spoken of, and the visible, and not seldom audible, disrespectfulness which high and low treat us with to our faces, as we go to and from church, and even at church, for nowhere else have we the heart to go, as if none of us had been regarded but upon her account, and as if she were innocent, we all in fault, are constant aggravations, you must needs think, to the whole family. She has made my lot heavy, I am sure, that was far from being light before. To tell you truth, I am enjoined not to receive any thing of hers, from any hand, without leave. Should I therefore gratify my yearnings after her, so far as to receive privately the letter you mention, what would the case be but to torment myself without being able to do her good? And were it to be known, Mr. Harlowe is so passionate, and should it throw his gout into his stomach, as her rash flight did, indeed, I am very unhappy. For, O my good woman, she is my child still. But unless it were more in my power, yet do I long to see the letter. You say it tells of her present way and circumstances. The poor child, who ought to be in possession of thousands, and will, for her father will be a faithful steward for her, but it must be in his own way, and at his own time. And is she really ill? So very ill? But she ought to sorrow. She has given a double measure of it. But does she really believe she shall not long trouble us? But, oh my Norton, she must, she will, long trouble us. For can she think her death, if we should be deprived of her, will put an end to our afflictions? Can it be thought that the fall of such a child will not be regretted by us to the last hour of our lives? But in the letter you have, does she, without reserve, express her contrition? Has she in it no reflecting hints? Does she not aim at extenuations? If I were to see it, will it not shock me so much that my apparent grief may expose me to harshnesses? Can it be contrived? But to what purpose? Don't send it. I charge you, don't. I dare not see it yet. But alas! O forgive the almost distracted mother! You know how to allow for all this, so I will let it go. I will not write over again this part of my letter. But I choose not to know more of her than is communicated to us all, no more than I dare own I have seen, and what some of them may rather communicate to me than receive from me, and this for the sake of my outward quiet, although my inward peace suffers more and more by the compelled reserve. I was forced to break off, but I will now try to conclude my long letter. I am sorry you are ill. But if you were well, I could not, for your own sake, wish you to go up, as Betty tells us you long to do. If you went, nothing would be minded that came from you. As they already think you too partial in her favour, your going up would confirm it, and do yourself prejudice, and her no good. And as every body values you here, I advise you not to interest yourself too warmly in her favour, especially before my Bella's Betty, till I can let you know a proper time. Yet to forbid you to love the dear naughty creature, who can? O my Norton, you must love her! And so must I. I send you 5 guineas, to help you in your present illness, and your son's; for it must have lain heavy upon you. What a sad, sad thing, my dear good woman, that all your pains, and all my pains, for 18 or 19 years together, have in so few months been rendered thus deplorably vain! Yet I must be always your friend, and pity you, for the very reason that I myself deserve every one's pity. Perhaps I may find an opportunity to pay you a visit as in your illness, and then may weep over the letter you mention with you. But for the future write nothing to me about the poor girl that you think may not be communicated to us all. And I charge you, as you value my friendship, as you wish my peace, not to say any thing of a letter you have from me, either to the naughty one, or to any body else. It was with some little relief, the occasion given, to write to you, who must in so particular a manner share my affliction. A mother, Mrs. Norton, cannot forget her child, though that child could abandon her mother, and in so doing run away with all her mother's comforts, as I truly say is the case of your unhappy friend, Charlotte Harlowe. End of Letter 58. Letter 59 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 59. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Mrs. Judith Norton, Saturday, July 29. I congratulate you, my dear Mrs. Norton, with all my heart, on your son's recovery, which I pray to God, with all your own health, to perfect. I write in some hurry, being apprehensive of the sequence of the hints you give of some method you propose to try in my favour, with my relations I presume you mean, but you will not tell me what, you say, if it prove unsuccessful. Now I must beg of you that you will not take any step in my favour, with which you do not first acquaint me. I have but one request to make to them, besides what is contained in my letter to my sister, and I would not, methinks, for the sake of their own future peace of mind, that they should be teased so by your well-meant kindness, and that of Miss Howe, as to be put upon denying me that. And why should more be asked for me than I can partake of? More than is absolutely necessary for my own peace? You suppose I should have my sister's answer to my letter by the time yours reach my hand. I have it, and a severe one, a very severe one, it is. Yet, considering my fault in their eyes, and the provocations I am to suppose they so newly had from my dear Miss Howe, I am to look upon it as a favour that it was answered at all. I will send you a copy of it soon, as also of mine, to which it is an answer. I have reason to be very thankful that my father has withdrawn that heavy malediction which affected me so much. A parent's curse, my dear Mrs. Norton! What child could die in peace under a parent's curse? So literally fulfilled too, as this has been in what relates to this life. My heart is too full to touch upon the particulars of my sister's letter. I can make but one atonement for my fault. May that be accepted, and may it soon be forgotten by every dear relation, that there was such an unhappy daughter, sister, or niece as Clarissa Harlowe. My cousin Morden was one of those who were so earnest in prayer for my recovery, at 9 and 11 years of age, as you mention. My sister thinks he will be one of those who wish I never had had a being. But pray, when he does come, let me hear of it with the first. You think that, were it not for that unhappy notion of my moving talent, my mother would relent. What would I give to see her once more, and, although unknown to her, to kiss but the hem of her garment? Could I have thought that the last time I saw her would have been the last, with what difficulty should I have been torn from her embraced feet! And when, screened behind the yew hedge on the 5th of April last, I saw my father and my uncle Antony, and my brother and sister, how little did I think that that would be the last time I should ever see them, and in so short a space that so many dreadful evils would befall me! But I can write nothing but what must give you trouble. I will therefore, after repeating my desire that you will not intercede for me but with my previous consent, conclude with the assurance that I am, and ever will be, your most affectionate and dutiful Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 59. Letter 60 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson, Letter 60. Miss Arabella Harlowe, to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Thursday, July 27th. O my unhappy lost sister! What a miserable hand have you made of your romantic and giddy expedition! I pity you at my heart. You may well grieve and repent. Lovelace has left you. In what way or circumstances you know best. I wish your conduct had made your case more pitiable. But 'tis your own seeking. God help you! For you have not a friend will look upon you. Poor, wicked, undone creature! Fallen as you are, against warning, against expostulation, against duty! But it signifies nothing to reproach you. I weep over you. My poor mother! Your rashness and folly have made her more miserable than you can be. Yet she has besought my father to grant your request. My uncles joined with her; for they thought there was a little more modesty in your letter than in the letters of your pert advocate: and my father is pleased to give me leave to write, but only these words for him, and no more: that he withdraws the curse he laid upon you, at the first hearing of your wicked flight, so far as it is in his power to do it; and hopes that your present punishment may be all that you will meet with. For the rest, he will never own you, nor forgive you, and grieves he has such a daughter in the world. All this and more you have deserved from him, and from all of us. But what have you done to this abandoned libertine, to deserve what you have met with at his hands? I fear, sister. But no more. A blessed 4 months' work have you made of it. My brother is now at Edinburgh, sent thither by my father, though he knows not this to be the motive, that he may not meet your triumphant deluder. We are told he would be glad to marry you. But why, then, did he abandon you? He had kept you till he was tired of you, no question: and it is not likely he would wish to have you but upon the terms you have already, without all doubt, been his. You ought to advise your friend Miss Howe to concern herself less in your matters than she does, except she could do it with more decency. She has written 3 letters to me, very insolent ones. Your favourer, poor Mrs. Norton, thinks you know nothing of the pert creature's writing. I hope you don't. But then the more impertinent the writer. But, believing the fond woman, I sat down the more readily to answer your letter; and I write with less severity, I can tell you, than otherwise I should have done, if I had answered it all. Monday last was your birthday. Think, poor ungrateful wretch as you are, how we all used to keep it; and you will not wonder to be told, that we ran away from one another that day. But God give you true penitence, if you have it not already; and it will be true, if it be equal to the shame and the sorrow you have given us all. Your afflicted sister, Arabella Harlowe. Your cousin Morden is every day expected in England. He, as well as others of the family, when he comes to hear what a blessed piece of work you have made of it, will wish you never had had a being. End of Letter 60. Letter 61 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 61. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Miss Howe, Sunday, July 30th. You have given me great pleasure, my dearest friend, by your approbation of my reasonings, and of my resolution founded upon them, never to have Mr. Lovelace. This approbation is so right a thing, give me leave to say, from the nature of the case, and from the strict honour and true dignity of mind, which I always admired in my Anna Howe, that I could hardly tell to what, but to my evil destiny, which of late would not let me please any body, to attribute the advice you gave me to the contrary. But let not the ill state of my health, and what that may naturally tend to, sadden you. I have told you, that I will not run away from life, nor avoid the means that may continue it, if God see fit. And if he do not, who shall repine at his will? If it shall be found that I have not acted unworthy of your love, and of my own character in my greater trials, that will be a happiness to both on reflection. The shock which you so earnestly advised me to try to get above was a shock, the greatest that I could receive. But, my dear, as it was not occasioned by my fault, I hope I am already got above it. I hope I am. I am more grieved at times, however, for others than for myself. And so I ought. For as to myself, I cannot but reflect, that I have had an escape, rather than a loss, in missing Mr. Lovelace for a husband, even had he not committed the vilest of all outrages. Let any one who knows my story collect his character from his behaviour to me before that outrage, and then judge whether it was in the least probable that such a man should make me happy. But to collect his character from his principles with regard to the sex in general, and from his enterprises upon many of them, and to consider the cruelty of his nature, and the sportiveness of his invention, together with the high opinion he has of himself, it will not be doubted that a wife of his must have been miserable, and more miserable if she loved him, than she could have been were she to be indifferent to him. A 12-month might very probably have put a period to my life, situated as I was with my friends, persecuted and harassed as I had been by my brother and sister, and my very heart torn in pieces by the wilful, and, as it is now apparent, premeditated suspenses of the man, whose gratitude I wished to engage, and whose protection I was the more entitled to expect, as he had robbed me of every other, and reduced me to an absolute dependence upon himself. Indeed, I once thought that it was all his view to bring me to this, as he hated my family, and uncomfortable enough for me, if it had been all. Can it be thought, my dear, that my heart was not more than half broken, happy as I was before I knew Mr. Lovelace, by a grievous change in my circumstances? Indeed it was. Nor perhaps was the wicked violence wanting to have cut short, though possibly not so very short, a life that he has sported with. Had I been his but a month, he must have possessed the estate on which my relations had set their hearts, the more to their regret, as they hated him as much as he hated them. Have I not reason, these things considered, to think myself happier without Mr. Lovelace than I could have been with him? My will, too, unviolated, and very little, nay, not any thing as to him, to reproach myself with. But with my relations it is otherwise. They indeed deserve to be pitied. They are, and no doubt will long be, unhappy. To judge of their resentments and of their conduct, we must put ourselves in their situation; and while they think me more in fault than themselves, whether my favourers are of their opinion or not, and have a right to judge for themselves, they ought to have great allowances made for them, my parents especially. They stand at least self-acquitted, that I cannot; and the rather as they can recollect, to their pain, their past indulgences to me, and their unquestionable love. Your partiality for the friend you so much value will not easily let you come into this way of thinking. But only, my dear, be pleased to consider the matter in the following light. Here was my mother, one of the most prudent persons of her sex, married into a family not perhaps so happily tempered as herself, but every one of which she had the address, for a great while, absolutely to govern, as she pleased, by her directing wisdom, at the same time that they knew not but her prescriptions were the dictates of their own hearts. Such a sweet heart had she of conquering by seeming to yield. Think, my dear, what must be the pride and the pleasure of such a mother, that in my brother she could give a son to the family she distinguished with her love, not unworthy of their wishes; a daughter in my sister, of whom she had no reason to be ashamed; and in me a second daughter, whom every body complimented, such was their partial favour to me, as being the still more immediate likeness of herself. How, self-pleased, could she smile round upon a family she had so blessed? What compliments were paid her upon the example she had given us, which was followed with such hopeful effects? With what a noble confidence could she look upon her dear Mr. Harlowe, as a person made happy by her, and be delighted to think that nothing but purity streamed from a fountain so pure! Now, my dear, reverse, as I daily do, this charming prospect. See my dear mother sorrowing in her closet, endeavouring to suppress her sorrow at her table, and in those retirements where sorrow was before a stranger; hanging down her pensive head; smiles no more beaming over her benign aspect; her virtue made to suffer for faults she could not be guilty of; her patience continually tried, because she has more of it than any other, with repetitions of faults she is as much wounded by as those can be from whom she so often hears of them; taking to herself as the fountain head a taint which only had infected one of the under currents; afraid to open her lips, were she willing in my favour, lest it should be thought she has any bias in her own mind to failings that never could have been suspected in her; robbed of that pleasing merit, which the mother of well-nurtured and hopeful children may glory in; every one who visits her, or is visited by her, by dumb show, and looks at me more than words can express, condoling where they used to congratulate; the affected silence wounding, the compassionating look reminding, the half-suppressed sigh in them calling up deeper sighs from her, and their averted eyes, while they endeavour to restrain the rising tear, provoking tears from her that will not be restrained. When I consider these things, and added to these the pangs that tear in pieces the stronger heart of my father, because it cannot relieve itself by those which carry the torturing grief to the eyes of softer spirits, the overboiling tumults of my impatient and uncontrollable brother, piqued to the heart of his honour, in the fall of a sister, in whom he once gloried, the pride of an elder sister, who had given unwilling way to the honours paid over her head to one born after her, and lastly, the dishonour I have brought upon two uncles, who each contended which should most favour their then happy niece. When I say, I reflect upon my fault in these strong yet just lights, what room can there be to censure any body but my unhappy self? And how much reason have I to say, if I justify myself, mine own heart shall condemn me? If I say I am perfect, it shall also prove me perverse. Here permit me to lay down my pen for a few moments. You are very obliging to me, intentionally I know, when you tell me it is in my power to hasten the day of Mr. Hickman's happiness. But yet give me leave to say, that I admire this kind assurance less than any other paragraph of your letter. In the first place, you know it is not in my power to say when I can dismiss my physician; and you should not put the celebration of a marriage intended by yourself, and so desirable to your mother, upon so precarious an issue. Nor will I accept of a compliment which must mean a slight to her. If any thing could give me a relish for life, after what I have suffered, it would be the hopes of the continuance of the more than sisterly love, which has for years uninterruptedly bound us together as one mind. And why, my dear, should you defer giving, by a tie still stronger, another friend to one who has so few? I am glad you have sent my letter to Miss Montague. I hope I shall hear no more of this unhappy man. I had begun the particulars of my tragical story, but it is so painful a task, and I have so many more important things to do, and, as I apprehend, so little time to do them in, that could I avoid it, I would go no further in it. Then, to this hour, I know not by what means several of his machinations to ruin me were brought about, so that some material parts of my sad story must be defective, if I were to sit down to write it. But I have been thinking of a way that will answer the end wished for by your mother, and you full as well, perhaps better. Mr. Lovelace, it seems, had communicated to his friend Mr. Belford all that has passed between himself and me, as he went on. Mr. Belford has not been able to deny it. So that, as we may observe by the way, a poor young creature, whose indiscretion has given a libertine power over her, has a reason she little thinks of, to regret her folly, since these wretches, who have no more honour in one point than in another, scruple not to make her weakness a part of their triumph to their brother libertines. I have nothing to apprehend of this sort, if I have the justice done me in his letters, which Mr. Belford assures me I have. And therefore the particulars of my story, and the base arts of this vile man, will, I think, be best collected from those very letters of his, if Mr. Belford can be prevailed upon to communicate them; to which I dare appeal with the same truth and fervour as he did, who says, O that one would hear me, and that mine adversary had written a book! Surely I would take it upon my shoulders, and bind it to me as a crown; for I covered not my transgressions as Adam, by hiding mine iniquity in my bosom. There is one way which may be fallen upon to induce Mr. Belford to communicate these letters, since he seems to have, and declares he always had, a sincere abhorrence of his friend's baseness to me. But that, you'll say, when you hear it, is a strange one. Nevertheless, I am very earnest upon it at present. It is no other than this. I think to make Mr. Belford the executor of my last will. Don't be surprised. And with this view I permit his visits with the less scruple; and every time I see him, from his concern for me, am more and more inclined to do so. If I hold in the same mind, and if he accept the trust, and will communicate the materials in his power, those, joined with what you can furnish, will answer the whole end. I know you will start at my notion of such an executor. But pray, my dear, consider, in my present circumstances, what I can do better, as I am empowered to make a will, and have considerable matters in my own disposal. Your mother, I am sure, would not consent that you should take this office upon you. It might subject Mr. Hickman to the insults of that violent man. Mrs. Norton cannot, for several reasons respecting herself. My brother looks upon what I ought to have as his right. My uncle Harlowe is already one of my trustees, as my cousin Morden is the other, for the estate my grandfather left me. But you see I could not get from my own family the few guineas I left behind me at Harlowe place, and my uncle Antony once threatened to have my grandfather's will controverted. My father! To be sure, my dear, I could not expect that my father would do all I wish should be done. And a will to be executed by a father for a daughter, parts of it perhaps absolutely against his own judgment, carries somewhat daring and prescriptive in the very word. If indeed my cousin Morden were to come in time, and would undertake this trust, but even him it might subject to hazards, and the more as he is a man of great spirit, and as the other man, of as great, looks upon me, unprotected as I have long been, as his property. Now Mr. Belford, as I have already mentioned, knows every thing that has passed. He is a man of spirit, and it seems as fearless as the other, with more humane qualities. You don't know, my dear, what instances of sincere humanity this Mr. Belford has shown, not only on occasion of the cruel arrest, but on several occasions since. And Mrs. Lovick has taken pains to inquire after his general character, and hears a very good one of him, his justice and generosity in all his concerns of meum and tuum, as they are called. He has a knowledge of law matters, and has 2 executorships upon him at this time, in the discharge of which his honour is unquestioned. All these reasons have already in a manner determined me to ask this favour of him, although it will have an odd sound with it, to make an intimate friend of Mr. Lovelace my executor. This is certain, my brother will be more acquiescent a great deal in such a case with the articles of the will, as he will see that it will be to no purpose to controvert some of them, which else, I dare say, he would controvert, or persuade my other friends to do so. And who would involve an executor in a lawsuit if they could help it? Which would be the case if any body were left whom my brother could hope to awe or control, since my father has possession of all, and is absolutely governed by him. Angry spirits, my dear, as I have often seen, will be overcome by more angry ones, as well as sometimes be disarmed by the meek. Nor would I wish, you may believe, to have effects torn out of my father's hands, while Mr. Belford, who is a man of fortune, and a good economist in his own affairs, would have no interest but to do justice. Then he exceedingly presses for some occasion to show his readiness to serve me, and he would be able to manage his violent friend, over whom he has more influence than any other person. But after all, I know not if it were not more eligible by far that my story, and myself too, should be forgotten as soon as possible. And of this I shall have the less doubt, if the character of my parents (you will forgive me, my dear) cannot be guarded against the unqualified bitterness which, from your affectionate zeal for me, has sometimes mingled with your ink. A point that ought, and, I insist upon it, must be well considered of, if any thing be done which your mother and you are desirous to have done. The generality of the world is too apt to oppose a duty; and general duties, my dear, ought not to be weakened by the justification of a single person, however unhappily circumstanced. My father has been so good as to take off the heavy malediction he laid me under. I must be now solicitous for a last blessing, and that is all I shall presume to petition for. My sister's letter, communicating this grace, is a severe one; but as she writes to me as from every body, how could I expect it to be otherwise? If you set out to morrow, this letter cannot reach you till you get to your aunt Harman's. I shall therefore direct it thither, as Mr. Hickman instructed me. I hope you will have met with no inconveniencies in your little journey and voyage, and that you will have found in good health all whom you wish to see well. If your relations in the little island join their solicitations with your mother's commands to have your nuptials celebrated before you leave them, let me beg of you, my dear, to oblige them. How grateful will the notification that you have done so be to your ever faithful and affectionate Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 61. Letter 62 Of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 62. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Miss Harlowe, Saturday, July 29th. I repine not, my dear sister, at the severity you have been pleased to express in the letter you favoured me with, because that severity was accompanied with the grace I had petitioned for, and because the reproaches of mine own heart are stronger than any other person's reproaches can be. And yet I am not half so culpable as I am imagined to be, as would be allowed if all the circumstances of my unhappy story were known, and which I shall be ready to communicate to Mrs. Norton, if she be commissioned to inquire into them, or to you, my sister, if you can have patience to hear them. I remembered with a bleeding heart what day the 24th of July was. I began with the eve of it, and I passed the day itself, as it was fit I should pass it. Nor have I any comfort to give to my dear and ever honoured father and mother, and to you, my Bella, but this, that, as it was the first unhappy anniversary of my birth, in all probability, it will be the last. Believe me, my dear sister, I say not this merely to move compassion, but from the best grounds; and as, on that account, I think it of the highest importance to my peace of mind to obtain one further favour. I would choose to owe to your intercession, as my sister, the leave I beg, to address 6 lines, with the hope of having them answered as I wish, to either or to both my honoured parents, to beg their last blessing. This blessing is all the favour I have now to ask. It is all I dare to ask. Yet am I afraid to rush at once, though by letter, into the presence of either. And if I did not ask it, it might seem to be owing to stubbornness and want of duty, when my heart is all humility, penitence. Only be so good as to embolden me to attempt this task. Write but this one line: Clary Harlowe, you are at liberty to write as you desire. This will be enough, and shall to my last hour be acknowledged as the greatest favour by your truly penitent sister, Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 62. Letter 63 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 63. Mrs. Norton to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Monday, July 31st. My dearest young lady, I must indeed own that I took the liberty to write to your mother, offering to enclose to her, if she gave me leave, yours of the 24th, by which I thought she would see what was the state of your mind, what the nature of your last troubles was from the wicked arrest, what the people are where you lodge, what proposals were made you from Lord M.'s family, also your sincere penitence, and how much Miss Howe's writing to them, in the terms she wrote in, disturbed you. But, as you have taken the matter into your own hands, and forbid me, in your last, to act in this nice affair unknown to you, I am glad the letter was not required of me. And indeed it may be better that the matter lie wholly between you and them, since my affection for you is thought to proceed from partiality. They would choose, no doubt, that you should owe to themselves, and not to my humble mediation, the favour for which you so earnestly sue, and of which I would not have your despair. For I will venture to assure you, that your mother is ready to take the first opportunity to show her maternal tenderness. And this I gather from several hints I am not at liberty to explain myself upon. I long to be with you, now I am better, and now my son is in a fair way of recovery. But is it not hard to have it signified to me, that at present it will not be taken well if I go? I suppose, while the reconciliation, which I hope will take place, is negotiating by means of the correspondence so newly opened between you and your sister. But if you will have me come, I will rely on my good intentions, and risk every one's displeasure. Mr. Brand has business in town, to solicit for a benefice, which it is expected the incumbent will be obliged to quit for a better preferment, and when there, he is to inquire privately after your way of life, and of your health. He is a very officious young man, and but that your uncle Harlowe, who has chosen him for this errand, regards him as an oracle, your mother had rather any body else had been sent. He is one of those puzzling, overdoing gentlemen, who think they see further into matters than any body else, and are fond of discovered mysteries where there are none, in order to be thought shrewd men. I can't say I like him, either in the pulpit or out of it. I, who had a father one of the soundest divines and finest scholars in the kingdom, who never made an ostentation of what he knew, but loved and venerated the gospel he taught, preferring it to all other learning, to be obliged to hear a young man depart from his text as soon as he has named it, so contrary, too, to the example set him by his learned and worthy principal when his health permits him to preach, and throwing about, to a Christian and country audience, scraps of Latin and Greek from the pagan classics, and not always brought in with great propriety neither, if I am to judge by the only way given me to judge of them, by the English he puts them into, is an indication of something wrong, either in his head, or his heart, or both. For otherwise his education at the university must have taught him better. You know, my dear Miss Clary, the honour I have for the cloth. It is owing to that I say what I do. I know not the day he is to set out; and, as his inquiries are to be private, be pleased to take no notice of this intelligence. I have no doubt that your life and conversation are such as may defy the scrutinies of the most officious inquirer. I am just now told that you have written a second letter to your sister; but am afraid they will wait for Mr. Brand's report before further favour will be obtained from them, for they will not yet believe you are so ill as I fear you are. But you would soon find that you have an indulgent mother, were she at liberty to act according to her own inclination. And this gives me great hopes that all will end well at last; for I verily think you are in the right way to a reconciliation. God give a blessing to it, and restore your health, and you to all your friends, prays Your ever affectionate Judith Norton. Your mother has privately sent me 5 guineas. She is pleased to say to help us in the illness we have been afflicted with; but more likely that I might send them to you, as from myself. I hope, therefore, I may send them up, with 10 more I have still left. I will send you word of Mr. Morden's arrival, the moment I know it. If agreeable, I should be glad to know all that passes between your relations and you. End of Letter 63. Letter 64 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 64. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Mrs. Norton, Wednesday, August 2nd. You give me, my dear Mrs. Norton, great pleasure in hearing of yours and your son's recovery. May you continue, for many, many years, a blessing to each other. You tell me that you did actually write to my mother, offering to enclose to her mine of the 24th past, and you say it was not required of you; that is to say, although you cover it over as gently as you could, that your offer was rejected, which makes it evident that no plea could be made for me. Yet you bid me hope that the grace I sued for would in time be granted. The grace I then sued for was indeed granted; but you are afraid, you say, that they will wait for Mr. Brand's report before favour will be obtained in return to the second letter which I wrote to my sister; and you add, that I have an indulgent mother, were she at liberty to act according to her own inclination, and that all will end well at last. But what, my dear Mrs. Norton, what is the grace I sue for in my second letter? It is not that they will receive me into favour. If they think it is, they are mistaken. I do not, I cannot expect that; nor, as I have often said, should I, if they would receive me, bear to live in the eye of those dear friends whom I have so grievously offended. 'Tis only simply a blessing I ask. A blessing to die with, not to lie with. Do they know that? And do they know that their unkindness will perhaps shorten my date, so that their favour, if ever they intend to grant it, may come too late? Once more, I desire you not to think of coming to me. I have no uneasiness now, but what proceeds from the apprehension of seeing a man I would not see for the world, if I could help it, and from the severity of my nearest and dearest relations; a severity entirely their own, I doubt; for you tell me that my brother is at Edinburgh. You would therefore heighten their severity, and make yourself enemies besides, if you were to come to me. Don't you see you would? Mr. Brand may come if he will. He is a clergyman, and must mean well; or I must think so, let him say of me what he will. All my fear is, that, as he knows I am in disgrace with a family whose esteem he is desirous to cultivate, and as he has obligations to my uncle Harlowe and to my father, he will be but a languid acquitter. Not that I am afraid of what he, or any body in the world, can hear as to my conduct. You may, my revered and dear friend, indeed you may, rest satisfied, that that is such as may warrant me to challenge the inquiries of the most officious. I will send you copies of what passes, as you desire, when I have an answer to my second letter. I now begin to wish that I had taken the heart to write to my father himself, or to my mother at least, instead of to my sister; and yet I doubt my poor mother can do nothing for me of herself. A strong confederacy, my dear Mrs. Norton, a strong confederacy indeed, against a poor girl, their daughter, sister, niece. My brother perhaps got it renewed before he left them. He needed not. His work is done, and more than done. Don't afflict yourself about money matters on my account. I have no occasion for money. I am glad my mother was so considerate to you. I was in pain for you on the same subject. But Heaven will not permit so good a woman to want the humble blessings she was always satisfied with. I wish every individual of our family were but as rich as you. O my mamma Norton, you are rich. You are rich indeed. The true riches are such content as you are blessed with. And I hope in God that I am in the way to be rich too. Adieu, my ever indulgent friend. You say all will be at last happy. And I know it will. I confide that it will, with as much security as you may, that I will be, to my last hour, your ever grateful and affectionate Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 64. Letter 65 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 65. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. Tuesday, August 1st. I am most confoundedly chagrined and disappointed. For here, on Saturday, arrived a messenger from Miss Howe, with a letter to my cousins, which I knew nothing of till yesterday, when Lady Sarah and Lady Betty were procured to be here, to sit in judgment upon it with the old peer, and my two kinswomen. And never was bear so miserably baited as thy poor friend. And for what? Why, for the cruelty of Miss Harlowe. For have I committed any new offence? And would I not have reinstated myself in her favour upon her own terms, if I could? And is it fair to punish me for what is my misfortune and not my fault? Such event-judging fools as I have for my relations! I am ashamed of them all. In that of Miss Howe was enclosed one to her from Miss Harlowe, to be transmitted to my cousins, containing a final rejection of me, and that in very vehement and positive terms. Yet she pretends that, in this rejection, she is governed more by principle than passion. Damned lie, as ever was told. And as a proof that she is, says, that she can forgive me, and does, on this one condition, that I will never molest her more. The whole letter so written as to make herself more admired, me more detested. What we have been told of the agitations and workings, and sighings and sobbings, of the French prophets among us formerly, was nothing at all to the scene exhibited by these maudlin souls at the reading of these letters, and of some affecting passages extracted from another of my fair implacables to Miss Howe. Such lamentations for the loss of so charming a relation! Such applaudings of her virtue, of her exaltedness of soul and sentiment! Such menaces of disinherisance! I, not needing their reproaches to be stung to the heart with my own reflections, and with the rage of disappointment, and as sincerely as any of them admiring her. What the devil, cried I, is all this for? Is it not enough to be despised and rejected? Can I help her implacable spirit? Would I not repair the evils I have made her suffer? Then was I ready to curse them all, herself and Miss Howe for company, and heartily swore that she should yet be mine. I now swear it over again to thee. Were her death to follow in a week after the knot is tied, by the Lord of Heaven it shall be tied, and she shall die a Lovelace. Tell her so, if thou wilt. But at the same time, tell her that I have no view to her fortune, and that I will solemnly resign that, and all pretensions to it, in whose favour she pleases, if she resign life issueless. I am not so low-minded a wretch as to be guilty of any sordid views to her fortune. Let her judge for herself then, whether it be not for her honour rather to leave this world a Lovelace than a Harlowe. But do not think I will entirely rest a cause so near my heart upon an advocate who so much more admires his client's adversary than his client. I will go to town in a few days, in order to throw myself at her feet; and I will carry with me, or have at hand, a resolute, well-prepared parson; and the ceremony shall be performed, let what will be the consequence. But if she will permit me to attend her for this purpose at either of the churches mentioned in the license, which she has by her, and, thank Heaven, has not returned me with my letters, then will I not disturb her, but meet her at the altar in either church, and will engage to bring my two cousins to attend her, and even Lady Sarah and Lady Betty, and my Lord M. in person shall give her to me. Or, if it be still more agreeable to her, I will undertake that either Lady Sarah or Lady Betty, or both, shall go to town and attend her down, and the marriage shall be celebrated in their presence, and in that of Lord M., either here or elsewhere at her own choice. Do not play me booty, Belford, but sincerely and warmly use all the eloquence thou art master of, to prevail upon her to choose one of these three methods. One of them she must choose. By my soul, she must. Here is Charlotte tapping at my closet door for admittance. What a devil wants Charlotte? I will hear no more reproaches. Come in, girl. My cousin Charlotte, finding me writing on with too much earnestness to have any regard for politeness to her, and guessing at my subject, besought me to let her see what I had written. I obliged her; and she was so highly pleased on seeing me so much in earnest, that she offered, and I accepted her offer, to write a letter to Miss Harlowe, with permission to treat me in it as she thought fit. I shall enclose a copy of her letter. When she had written it, she brought it to me, with apologies for the freedom taken with me in it; but I excused it, and she was ready to give me a kiss for it, telling her I had hopes of success from it, and that I thought she had luckily hit it off. Every one approves of it, as well as I, and is pleased with me for so patiently submitting to be abused and undertaken for. If it do not succeed, all the blame will be thrown upon the dear creature's perverseness, Her charitable or forgiving disposition, about which she makes such a parade, will be justly questioned; and the piety, of which she is now in full possession, will be transferred to me. Putting therefore my whole confidence in this letter, I postpone all my other alternatives, as also my going to town, till my Empress send an answer to my cousin Montague. But if she persist, and will not promise to take time to consider of the matter, thou mayest communicate to her what I had written, as above, before my cousin entered: and if she be still perverse, assure her, that I must and will see her; but this with all honour, all humility: and if I cannot move her in my favour, I will then go abroad, and perhaps never more return to England. I am sorry thou art at this critical time so busily employed, as thou informest me thou art, in thy Watford affairs, and in preparing to do Belton justice. If thou wantest my assistance in the latter, command me. Though engrossed by this perverse beauty, and plagued as I am, I will obey thy first summons. I have great dependence upon thy zeal and thy friendship. Hasten back to her, therefore, and resume a task so interesting to me, that it is equally the subject of my dreams, as of my waking hours. End of Letter LXV. Letter LXVI of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter LXVI. Miss Montague, to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Tuesday, August 1st. Dearest Madam, all our family is deeply sensible of the injuries you have received at the hands of one of it, whom you only can render in any manner worthy of the relation he stands in to us all: and if, as an act of mercy and charity, the greatest your pious heart can show, you will be pleased to look over his past wickedness and ingratitude, and suffer yourself to be our kinswoman, you will make us the happiest family in the world: and I can engage that Lord M. and Lady Sarah Sadleir, and Lady Betty Lawrance, and my sister, who are all admirers of your virtues, and of your nobleness of mind, will for ever love and reverence you, and do every thing in all their powers to make you amends for what you have suffered from Mr. Lovelace. This, Madam, we should not, however, dare to petition for, were we not assured that Mr. Lovelace is most sincerely sorry for his past vileness to you, and that he will, on his knees, beg your pardon, and vow eternal love and honour to you. Wherefore, my dearest cousin, how you will charm us all, if this agreeable style may be permitted! For all our sakes, for his soul's sake, you must, I am sure, be so good a lady as to wish to save a soul: and allow me to say, for your own fame's sake, condescend to our joint request: and if by way of encouragement you will but say you will be glad to see, and to be as much known personally as you are by fame, to Charlotte Montague, I will, in 2 days' time from the receipt of your permission, wait upon you with or without my sister, and receive your further commands. Let me, our dearest cousin, we cannot deny ourselves the pleasure of calling you so, let me entreat you to give me your permission for my journey to London, and put it in the power of Lord M. and of the ladies of the family, to make you what reparation they can make you for the injuries which a person of the greatest merit in the world has received from one of the most audacious men in it: and you will infinitely oblige us all, and particularly her, who repeatedly presumes to style herself your affectionate cousin and obliged servant, Charlotte Montague. End of Letter LXVI. Letter LXVII of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter LXVII. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Thursday morning, August 3rd, 6 o'clock. I have been so much employed in my own and Belton's affairs, that I could not come to town till last night, having contented myself with sending to Mrs. Lovick to know from time to time the state of the lady's health, of which I receive but very indifferent accounts, owing in a great measure to letters or advices brought her from her implacable family. I have now completed my own affairs, and next week shall go to Epsom, to endeavour to put Belton's sister into possession of his own house for him, after which I shall devote myself wholly to your service, and to that of the lady. I was admitted to her presence last night, and found her visibly altered for the worse. When I went home, I had your letter of Tuesday last put into my hands. Let me tell thee, Lovelace, that I insist upon the performance of thy engagement to me, that thou wilt not personally molest her. End of Letter LXVII. Letter LXVIII of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter LXVIII. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Miss Montague, Thursday, August 3rd. Dear Madam, I am infinitely obliged to you for your kind and condescending letter. A letter, however, which heightens my regrets, as it gives me a new instance of what a happy creature I might have been in an alliance so much approved of by such worthy ladies, and which on their accounts, and on that of Lord M., would have been so reputable to myself, and was once so desirable. But indeed, Madam, my heart sincerely repulses the man who, descended from such a family, could be guilty, first, of such premeditated violence as he has been guilty of, and, as he knows, further intended me, on the night previous to the day he set out for Berkshire; and next, pretending to spirit, could be so mean as to wish to lift into that family a person he was capable of abasing into a companionship with the most abandoned of her sex. Allow me then, dear Madam, to declare with favour, that I think I never could be ranked with the ladies of a family so splendid and so noble, if, by vowing love and honour at the altar to such a violator, I could sanctify, as I may say, his unprecedented and elaborate wickedness. Permit me, however, to make one request to my good Lord M. and to Lady Betty and Lady Sarah, and to your kind self and your sister. It is, that you will all be pleased to join your authority and interest to prevail upon Mr. Lovelace not to molest me further. Be pleased to tell him that, if I am designed for life, it will be very cruel in him to attempt to hunt me out of it; for I am determined never to see him more if I can help it. The more cruel, because he knows that I have nobody to defend me from him, nor do I wish to engage any body to his hurt, or to their own. If I am, on the other hand, destined for death, it will be no less cruel, if he will not permit me to die in peace, since a peaceable and happy end I wish him. Indeed I do. Every worldly good attend you, dear Madam, and every branch of the honourable family, is the wish of one, whose misfortune it is, that she is obliged to disclaim any other title than that of, dear Madam, your and their obliged and faithful servant, Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter LXVIII. Letter LXIX of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter LXIX. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Thursday afternoon, August 3rd. I am just now agreeably surprised by the following letter, delivered into my hands by a messenger from the lady. The letter she mentions as enclosed I have returned, without taking a copy of it. The contents of it will soon be communicated to you, I presume, by other hands. They are an absolute rejection of thee, poor Lovelace. To John Belford, Esq. August 3rd. Sir, you have frequently offered to oblige me in any thing that shall be within your power; and I have such an opinion of you, as to be willing to hope that, at the times you made these offers, you meant more than mere compliment. I have therefore two requests to make to you. The first I will now mention; the other, if this shall be complied with; otherwise not. It behoves me to leave behind me such an account as may clear up my conduct to several of my friends, who will not at present concern themselves about me; and Miss Howe and her mother are very solicitous that I will do so. I am apprehensive that I shall not have time to do this; and you will not wonder that I have less and less inclination to set about such a painful task, especially as I find myself unable to look back with patience on what I have suffered, and shall be too much discomposed by the retrospection, were I obliged to make it, to proceed with the requisite temper in a task of still greater importance which I have before me. It is very evident to me that your wicked friend has given you, from time to time, a circumstantial account of all his behaviour to me, and devices against me; and you have more than once assured me that he has done my character all the justice I could wish for, both by writing and speech. Now, Sir, if I may have a faithful specimen from his letters or accounts to you, written upon some of the most interesting occasions, I shall be able to judge whether there will or will not be a necessity for me, for my honour's sake, to enter upon the solicited task. You may be assured, from my enclosed answer to the letter which Miss Montague has honoured me with, and which you'll be pleased to return me as soon as read, that it is impossible for me ever to think of your friend in the way I am importuned to think of him. He cannot therefore receive any detriment from the requested specimen; and I give you my honour that no use shall be made of it to his prejudice, in law or otherwise; and that it may not, after I am no more, I assure you, that it is a main part of my view, that the passages you shall oblige me with shall be always in your own power, and not in that of any other person. If, Sir, you think fit to comply with my request, the passages I would wish to be transcribed, making neither better nor worse of the matter, are those which he has written to you on or about the 7th and 8th of June, when I was alarmed by the wicked pretence of a fire, and what he has written from Sunday, June 11th, to the 19th. And in doing this you will much oblige Your humble servant, Clarissa Harlowe. Now, Lovelace, since there are no hopes for thee of her returning favour, since some praise may lie for thy ingenuousness, having neither offered, as more diminutive-minded libertines would have done, to palliate thy crimes, by aspersing the lady or her sex; since you may be made easier by it; since I must fare better from thine own pen than from hers; and finally, since thy actions have manifested that thy letters are not the most guilty part of what she knows of thee, I see not why I may not oblige her upon her honour, and under the restrictions, and for the reasons she has given; and this without breach of the confidence due to friendly communication; especially, as I might have added, since thou gloriest in thy pen and in thy wickedness, and canst not be ashamed. But be this as it may, she will be obliged before thy remonstrances or clamours against it can come. So pr'ythee now, make the best of it, and rave not, except for the sake of a pretence against me, and to exercise thy talent of execration. And if thou likest to do so for these reasons, rave and welcome. I long to know what the second request is: but this I know, that if it be any thing less than cutting thy throat, or endangering my own neck, I will certainly comply, and be proud of having it in my power to oblige her. And now I am actually going to be busy in the extracts. End of Letter 69. Letter 70 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 70. Mr. Belford, to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, August 3rd, 4th. Madam, you have engaged me to communicate to you, upon my honour, making neither better nor worse of the matter, what Mr. Lovelace has written to me in relation to yourself in the period preceding your going to Hampstead, and in that between the 11th and 19th of June. And you assure me you have no view in this request, but to see if it be necessary for you, from the account he gives, to touch upon the painful subjects yourself, for the sake of your own character. Your commands, Madam, are of a very delicate nature, as they may seem to affect the secrets of private friendship. But as I know you are not capable of a view, the motives to which you will not own, and as I think the communication may do some credit to my unhappy friend's character as an ingenuous man, though his actions by the most excellent woman in the world have lost him all title to that of an honourable one, I obey you with the greater cheerfulness. He then proceeds with his extracts, and concludes them with an address to her in his friend's behalf, in the following words: And now, Madam, I have fulfilled your commands, and, I hope, have not disserved my friend with you, since you will hereby see the justice he does to your virtue in every line he writes. He does the same in all his letters, though to his own condemnation: and give me leave to add, that if this ever amiable sufferer can think it in any manner consistent with her honour to receive his vows on the altar, on his truly penitent turn of mind, I have not the least doubt but that he will make her the best and tenderest of husbands. What obligation will not the admirable lady hereby lay upon all his noble family, who so greatly admire her? And I will presume to say, upon her own, when the unhappy family aversion, which certainly has been carried to an unreasonable height against him, shall be got over, and a general reconciliation takes place? For who is it that would not give these two admirable persons to each other, were not his morals an objection? However this be, I would humbly refer to you, Madam, whether, as you will be mistress of very delicate particulars from me his friend, you should not in honour think yourself concerned to pass them by, as if you had never seen them, and not to take advantage of the communication, not even in an argument, as some perhaps might lie, with respect to the premeditated design he seems to have had, not against you, as you, but as against the sex, over whom, I am sorry I can bear witness myself, It is the villanous aim of all libertines to triumph; and I would not, if any misunderstanding should arise between him and me, give him room to reproach me that his losing of you, and through his usage of you, of his own friends, were owing to what perhaps he would call breach of trust, were he to judge rather by the event than by my intention. I am, Madam, with the most profound veneration, your most faithful humble servant, J. Belford. End of Letter LXX. Letter LXXI. Of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 71. Miss Clarissa Harlowe, to John Belford, Esq. Friday, August 4. Sir, I hold myself extremely obliged to you for your communications. I will make no use of them, that you shall have reason to reproach either yourself or me with. I wanted no new lights to make the unhappy man's premeditated baseness to me unquestionable, as my answer to Miss Montague's letter might convince you. I must own in his favour, that he has observed some decency in his accounts to you of the most indecent and shocking actions. And if all his strangely communicative narrations are equally decent, nothing will be rendered criminally odious by them, but the vile heart that could meditate such contrivances as were much stronger evidences of his inhumanity than of his wit; since men of very contemptible parts and understanding may succeed in the vilest attempts, if they can once bring themselves to trample on the sanctions which bind man to man, and sooner upon an innocent person than upon any other, because such a one is apt to judge of the integrity of others' hearts by its own. I find I have had great reason to think myself obliged to your intention in the whole progress of my sufferings. It is, however, impossible, Sir, to miss the natural inference on this occasion that lies against his predetermined baseness. But I say the less, because you shall not think I borrow, from what you have communicated, aggravations that are not needed. And now, Sir, that I may spare you the trouble of offering any future arguments in his favour, let me tell you that I have weighed every thing thoroughly, all that human vanity could suggest, all that a desirable reconciliation with my friends, and the kind respects of his own, could bid me hope for, the enjoyment of Miss Howe's friendship, the dearest consideration to me, now, of all the worldly ones. All these I have weighed, and the result is, and was before you favoured me with these communications, that I have more satisfaction in the hope that in 1 month there will be an end of all with me, than in the most agreeable things that could happen from an alliance with Mr. Lovelace, although I were to be assured he would make the best and tenderest of husbands. But as to the rest, if satisfied with the evils he has brought upon me, he will forbear all future persecutions of me, I will to my last hour wish him good, although he hath overwhelmed the fatherless, and digged a pit for his friend. Fatherless may she well be called, and motherless too, who has been denied all paternal protection, and motherly forgiveness. And now, Sir, acknowledging gratefully your favour in the extracts, I come to the second request I had to make you, which requires a great deal of courage to mention, and which courage nothing but a great deal of distress, and a very destitute condition, can give. But, if improper, I can but be denied, and dare to say I shall be at least excused. Thus then I preface it. You see, Sir, that I am thrown absolutely into the hands of strangers, who, although as kind and compassionate as strangers can be wished to be, are nevertheless persons from whom I cannot expect any thing more than pity and good wishes. Nor can my memory receive from them any more protection than my person, if either should need it. If then I request it of the only person possessed of materials that will enable him to do my character justice, and who has courage, independence, and ability to oblige me, to be the protector of my memory, as I may say, and to be my executor, and to see some of my dying requests performed; and if I leave it to him to do the whole in his own way, manner, and time, consulting, however, in requisite cases, my dear Miss Howe, I presume to hope that this my second request may be granted. And if it may, these satisfactions will accrue to me from the favour done me, and the office undertaken. It will be an honour to my memory, with all those who shall know that I was so well satisfied of my innocence, that, having not time to write my own story, I could entrust it to the relation which the destroyer of my fame and fortunes has given of it. I shall not be apprehensive of involving any one in my troubles or hazards by this task, either with my own relations or with your friend, having dispositions to make which perhaps my own friends will not be so well pleased with as it were to be wished they would be. As I intend not unreasonable ones, But you know, Sir, where self is judge, matters, even with good people, will not always be rightly judged of. I shall also be freed from the pain of recollecting things that my soul is vexed at, and this at a time when its tumults should be allayed, in order to make way for the most important preparation. And who knows but that Mr. Belford, who already, from a principle of humanity, is touched at my misfortunes, when he comes to revolve the whole story, placed before him in one strong light, and when he shall have the catastrophe likewise before him, and shall become in a manner interested in it, who knows but that, from a still higher principle, he may so regulate his future actions as to find his own reward in the everlasting welfare which is wished him by his obliged servant, Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 71. Letter 72 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 72. Mr. Belford to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Friday, August 4th. Madam, I am so sensible of the honour done me in yours of this day, that I would not delay for one moment the answering of it. I hope you will live to see many happy years, and to be your own executrix in those points which your heart is most set upon. But in the case of survivorship, I most cheerfully accept of the sacred office you are pleased to offer me, and you may absolutely rely upon my fidelity, and, if possible, upon the literal performance of every article you shall enjoin me. The effect of the kind wish you conclude with had been my concern ever since I have been admitted to the honour of your conversation. It shall be my whole endeavour that it be not vain. The happiness of approaching you, which this trust, as I presume, will give me frequent opportunities of doing, must necessarily promote the desired end, since it will be impossible to be a witness of your piety, equanimity, and other virtues, and not aspire to emulate you. All I beg is, that you will not suffer any future candidate or event to displace me, unless some new instances of unworthiness appear, either in the morals or behaviour of, Madam, your most obliged and faithful servant, J. Belford. End of Letter 72. Letter 73 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 73. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Friday night, August 4th. I have actually delivered to the lady the extract she requested me to give her from your letters. I do assure you that I have made the very best of the matter for you. Not that conscience, but that friendship, could oblige me to make. I have changed or omitted some free words. The warm description of her person in the fire scene, as I may call it, I have omitted. I have told her that I have done justice to you, in the justice you have done to her by her unexampled virtue. But take the very words which I wrote to her immediately following the extracts. And now, Madam, see the paragraph marked with an inverted comma, thus, Letter 70 of this volume. The lady is extremely uneasy at the thoughts of your attempting to visit her. For Heaven's sake, your word being given, and for pity's sake, for she is really in a very weak and languishing way, let me beg of you not to think of it. Yesterday afternoon she received a cruel letter, as Mrs. Lovick supposes it to be, by the effect it had upon her, from her sister, in answer to one written last Saturday, entreating a blessing and forgiveness from her parents. She acknowledges that if the same decency and justice are observed in all of your letters, as in the extracts I have obliged her with, as I have assured her they are, she shall think herself freed from the necessity of writing her own story, and this is an advantage to thee, which thou oughtest to thank me for. But what, thinkest thou, is the second request she had to make to me? No other than that I would be her executor. Her motives will appear before thee in proper time, and then, I dare to answer, will be satisfactory. You cannot imagine how proud I am of this trust. I am afraid I shall too soon come into the execution of it. As she is always writing, what a melancholy pleasure will be the perusal and disposition of her papers afford me! Such a sweetness of temper, so much patience and resignation, as she seems to be mistress of, yet writing of, and in the midst of present distresses, how much more lively and affecting for that reason must her style be, her mind tortured by the pangs of uncertainty, the events then hidden in the womb of fate, than the dry, narrative, unanimated style of persons relating difficulties and dangers surmounted. the relator perfectly at ease, and if himself unmoved by his own story, not likely greatly to affect the reader. Saturday morning, August 5th. I am just returned from visiting the lady, and thanking her in person for the honour she has done me, and assuring her, if called to the sacred trust, of the utmost fidelity and exactness. I found her very ill. I took notice of it. She said she had received a second hard-hearted letter from her sister, and she had been writing a letter, and that on her knees, directly to her mother, which before she had not had the courage to do. It was for a last blessing and forgiveness. No wonder, she said, that I saw her affected. Now that I had accepted of the last charitable office for her, for which, as well as for complying with her other request, she thanked me, I should one day have all these letters before me, and could she have a kind one in return to that she had been now writing, to counterbalance the unkind one she had from her sister, she might be induced to show me both together. Otherwise, for her sister's sake, it were no matter how few saw the poor Bella's letter. I knew she would be displeased if I had censured the cruelty of her relations. I therefore only said, that surely she must have enemies, who hoped to find their account in keeping up the resentments of her friends against her. It may be so, Mr. Belford, said she. The unhappy never want enemies. One fault, wilfully committed, authorizes the imputation of many more. Where the ear is open to accusations, accusers will not be wanting, and every one will officiously come with stories against a disgraced child, where nothing dare be said in her favour. I should have been wise in time, and not have needed to be convinced by my own misfortunes of the truth of what common experience daily demonstrates. Mr. Lovelace's baseness, my father's inflexibility, my sister's reproaches, are the natural consequences of my own rashness. So I must make the best of my hard lot. Only, as these consequences follow one another so closely, while they are new, how can I help being anew affected? I asked, if a letter written by myself, by her doctor or apothecary, to any of her friends, representing her low state of health, and great humility, would be acceptable; or if a journey to any of them would be of service. I would gladly undertake it in person, and strictly conform to her orders, to whomsoever she should direct me to apply. She earnestly desired that nothing of this sort might be attempted, especially without her knowledge and consent. Miss Howe, she said, had done harm by her kindly intended zeal; and if there were room to expect favour by mediation, she had ready at hand a kind friend, Mrs. Norton, who for piety and prudence had few equals, and who would let slip no opportunity to endeavour to do her service. I let her know that I was going out of town till Monday. She wished me pleasure, and said she should be glad to see me on my return. Adieu. End of Letter 73. Letter 74 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 74. Miss Arabella Harlowe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Thursday morning, August 3rd. Sister Clary, I wish you would not trouble me with any more of your letters. You had always a knack at writing, and depended upon making every one do what you would when you wrote. But your wit and folly have undone you. And now, as all naughty creatures do, when they can't help themselves, you come begging and praying, and make others as uneasy as yourself. When I wrote last to you, I expected that I should not be at rest. And so you'd creep on by little and little, till you'll want to be received again. But you only hope for forgiveness and a blessing, you say. A blessing for what, Sister Clary? Think for what? However, I read your letter to my father and mother. I won't tell you what my father said. One who has the true sense you boast to have of your misdeeds may guess, without my telling you, what a justly incensed father would say on such an occasion. My poor mother! O wretch! What has not your ungrateful folly cost my poor mother? Had you been less a darling, you would not, perhaps, have been so graceless. But I never in my life saw a cockered favourite come to good. My heart is full, and I can't help writing my mind, for your crimes have disgraced us all, and I am afraid and ashamed to go to any public or private assembly or diversion. And why? I need not say why, when your actions are the subjects either of the open talk, or of the affronting whispers of both sexes at all such places. Upon the whole, I am sorry I have no more comfort to send you, but I find nobody willing to forgive you. I don't know what time may do for you, and when it is seen that your penitence is not owing more to disappointment than to true conviction. For it is too probable, Miss Clary, that, had not your feather-headed villain abandoned you, we should have heard nothing of these moving supplications, nor of anything but defiances from him, and a guilt gloried in from you. And this is every one's opinion, as well as that of your afflicted sister, Arabella Harlowe. I send this by a particular hand, who undertakes to give it you or leave it for you by to-morrow night. End of Letter 74. Letter 75 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 75. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to her mother, Saturday, August 5th. Honoured Madam, no self-convicted criminal ever approached her angry and just judge with greater awe, nor with a truer contrition, than I do you by these lines. Indeed I must say, that if the latter of my humble prayer had not respected my future welfare, I had not dared to take this liberty. But my heart is set upon it, as upon a thing next to God Almighty's forgiveness necessary for me. Had my happy sister known my distresses, she would not have wrung my heart, as she has done, by a severity which I must needs think unkind and unsisterly. But complaint of any unkindness from her belongs not to me. Yet, as she is pleased to write that it must be seen that my penitence is less owing to disappointment than to true conviction, permit me, Madam, to insist upon it, that, if such a plea can be allowed me, I am actually entitled to the blessing I sue for, since my humble prayer is founded upon a true and unfeigned repentance. And this you all the readier believe, if the creature who never, to the best of her remembrance, told her mamma a wilful falsehood may be credited, when she declares, as she does, in the most solemn manner, that she met the seducer with a determination not to go off with him, that the rash step was owing more to compulsion than to infatuation, and that her heart was so little in it, that she repented and grieved from the moment she found herself in his power, and for every moment after, for several weeks, before she had any cause from him to apprehend the usage she met with. Wherefore on my knees, my ever-honoured mamma, for on my knees I write this letter, I do most humbly beg your blessing. Say but, in so many words, I ask you not, Madam, to call me your daughter. Lost, unhappy wretch, I forgive you, and may God bless you. This is all. Let me, on a blessed scrap of paper, but see one sentence to this effect under your dear hand, that I may hold it to my heart in my most trying struggles, and I shall think it a passport to heaven. And if I do not too much presume, and it were we instead of I, and both your honoured names subjoined to it, I should then have nothing more to wish. Then would I say, Great and merciful God, thou seest here in this paper thy poor unworthy creature absolved by her justly offended parents. O join, for my Redeemer's sake, thy all-gracious fiat, and receive a repentant sinner to the arms of thy mercy. I can conjure you, Madam, by no subject of motherly tenderness that will not, in the opinion of my severe censurers, before whom this humble address must appear, add to reproach. Let me therefore, for God's sake, prevail upon you to pronounce me blessed and forgiven, since you will thereby sprinkle comfort through the last hours of your Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 75. Letter 76 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 76. Miss Montague to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Monday, August 7th. Dear Madam, we were all of opinion before your letter came, that Mr. Lovelace was utterly unworthy of you, and deserved condign punishment, rather than to be blessed with such a wife, and hoped far more from your kind consideration for us than any we supposed you could have for so base an injurer. For we were all determined to love you and admire you, let his behaviour to you be what it would. But after your letter, what can be said? I am, however, commanded to write in all the subscribing names, to let you know how greatly your sufferings have affected us. To tell you that my Lord M. has forbid him evermore to enter the doors of the apartments where he shall be; and as you labour under the unhappy effects of your friend's displeasure, which may subject you to inconveniences, his Lordship and Lady Sarah and Lady Betty beg of you to accept for your life, or at least till you are admitted to enjoy your own estate, of 100 guineas per quarter, which will be regularly brought to you by an especial hand, and of the enclosed bank bill for a beginning. And do not, dearest Madam, we all beseech you, do not think you are beholden, for this token of Lord M.'s and Lady Sarah's and Lady Betty's love to you, to the friends of this vile man, for he has not one friend left among us. We each of us desire to be favoured with a place in your esteem, and to be considered upon the same foot of relationship as if what once was so much our pleasure to hope would be, had been. And it shall be our united prayer, that you may recover health and spirits, and live to see many happy years. And since this wretch can no more be pleaded for, that, when he is gone abroad, as he now is preparing to do, we may be permitted the honour of a personal acquaintance with a lady who has no equal. These are the earnest requests, dearest young lady, of your affectionate friends and most faithful servants, M. Sarah Sadler, Elizabeth Lawrence, Charlotte Montague, Martha Montague. You will break the hearts of the 3 first named more particularly, if you refuse them your acceptance. Dearest young lady, punish not them for his crimes. We send by a particular hand, which will bring us, we hope, your accepting favour. Mr. Lovelace writes by the same hand, but he knows nothing of our letter, nor we of his, for we shun each other, and one part of the house holds us, another him, the remotest from each other. End of Letter 76. Letter 77 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 77. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. Saturday, August 23rd. I am so disturbed at the contents of Miss Harlowe's answer to my cousin Charlotte's letter of Tuesday last, which was given her by the same fellow that gave me yours, that I have hardly patience or consideration enough to weigh what you write. She had need indeed to cry out for mercy for herself from her friends, who knows not how to show any. She is a true daughter of the Harlowes. By my soul, Jack, she is a true daughter of the Harlowes. Yet she has so many excellencies, that I must love her. And fool that I am, love her the more for despising me. Thou runnest on with thy cursed nonsensical reformado rote of dying, 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 and having once got the word by the end, canst not help foisting it in at every period. The devil take me if I don't think thou wouldst rather give her poison with thy own hands, rather than she should recover, and rob thee of the merit of being a conjurer. But no more of thy cursed Nell. Thy changes upon death's candlestick turn bottom upwards. She'll live to bury me, I see that. For by my soul I can neither eat, drink, nor sleep, nor, what is still worse, love any woman in the world but her. Nor care I to look upon a woman now. On the contrary, I turn my head from every one I meet, except by chance an eye, an air, a feature, strikes me, resembling hers in some glancing by face, and then I cannot forbear looking again, though the second look recovers me, for there can be nobody like her. But surely, Belford, the devil's in this woman. The more I think of her nonsense and obstinacy, the less patience I have with her. Is it possible she can do herself, her family, her friends, so much justice any other way as by marrying me? Were she sure she should live but a day, she ought to die a wife. If her Christian revenge will not let her wish to do so for her own sake, ought she not for the sake of her family and of her sex, which she pretends sometimes to have so much concern for? And if no sake is dear enough to move her Harlowe spirit in my favour, has she any title to the pity thou so pitifully art always bespeaking for her? As to the difference which her letter has made between me and the stupid family here, and I must tell thee we are all broken pieces, I value not that of a button. They are fools to anathematize and curse me, who can give them 10 curses for one, were they to hold it for a day together. I have one half of the house to myself, and that the best, for the great enjoy that least which costs them most. Grandeur and use are 2 things. The common part is theirs, the state part is mine, and here I lord it, and will lord it, as long as I please, while the 2 Percy sisters, the old gouty brother, and the 2 musty nieces, are stived up in the other half, and dare not stir for fear of meeting me, whom, that's the jest of it, they have forbidden coming into their apartments, as I have them into mine. And so I have them all prisoners, while I range about as I please. Pretty dogs and doggesses to quarrel and bark at me, and yet, whenever I appear, afraid to pop out of their kennels, or, if out before they see me, at the sight of me run growling in again with their flapped ears, their sweeping dewlaps, and their quivering tails curling inwards. And here, while I am thus worthily waging war with beetles, drones, wasps, and hornets, and am all on fire with the rage of slighted love, thou art regaling thyself with phlegm and rock-water, and art going on with thy reformation scheme, and thy exultations in my misfortunes. The devil take thee for an insensible dough-baked varlet! I have no more patience with thee than with the lady; for thou knowest nothing either of love or friendship, but art as unworthy of the one as incapable of the other. Else wouldst thou not rejoice, as thou dost under the grimace of pity, in my disappointments. And thou art a pretty fellow, art thou not, to engage to transcribe for her some parts of my letters written to thee in confidence? Letters that thou shouldst sooner have parted with thy cursed tongue, than have owned that thou ever hadst received such. Yet these are now to be communicated to her. But I charge thee, and woe be to thee if it be too late, that thou do not oblige her with a line of mine. If thou hast done it, the least vengeance I will take is to break through my honour given to thee not to visit her, as thou wilt have broken through thine to me, in communicating letters written under the seal of friendship. I am now convinced, too sadly for my hopes, by her letter to my cousin Charlotte, that she is determined never to have me. Unprecedented wickedness she calls mine to her. But how does she know what love in its flaming ardour will stimulate men to do? How does she know the requisite distinctions of the words she uses in this case? To think the worst, and to be able to make comparisons in these very delicate situations, must she not be less delicate than I had imagined her to be? But she has heard that the devil is black, and having a mind to make one of me, brays together, in the mortar of her wild fancy, 20 chimney sweepers, in order to make one sootier than ordinary rise out of the dirty mass. But what a whirlwind does she raise in my soul by her proud contempts of me! Never, never was mortal man's pride so mortified! How does she sink me, even in my own eyes! Her heart sincerely repulses me, she says, for my meanness. Yet she intends to reap the benefit of what she calls so. Curse upon her haughtiness, and her meanness, at the same time. Her haughtiness to me, and her meanness to her own relations, more unworthy of kindred with her than I can be, or I am mean indeed. Yet who but must admire, who but must adore her? O that cursed house! But for the women of that, then their damned potions! But for those, had her unimpaired intellects and the majesty of her virtues saved her, as once it did by her humble eloquence, another time by her terrifying menaces against her own life. Yet in both these to find her power over me, and my love for her, and to hate, to despise, and to refuse me! She might have done this with some show of justice, had the last intended violation been perpetrated. But to go away conqueress and triumphant in every light! Well may she despise me for suffering her to do so. She left me low and mean indeed. And the impression holds with her. I could tear my flesh that I gave her not cause, that I humbled her not indeed, or that I stayed not in town to attend her motions instead of Lord M.'s, till I could have exalted myself by giving to myself a wife superior to all trial, to all temptation. I will venture one more letter to her, however, and if that don't do, or procure me an answer, then will I endeavour to see her, let what will be the consequence. If she get out of my way, I will do some noble mischief to the vixen girl whom she most loves, and then quit the kingdom for ever. And now, Jack, since thy hand is in at communicating the contents of private letters, tell her this, if thou wilt, and add to it, that if she abandon me, God will, and what then will be the fate of her Lovelace? End of Letter 77. Letter 78 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 78. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esq. Monday, August 7th. And so you have actually delivered to the fair implacable extracts of letters written in the confidence of friendship? Take care, Belford. I do indeed love you better than I love any man in the world. But this is a very delicate point. The matter is grown very serious to me. My heart is bent upon having her, and have her I will, though I marry her in the agonies of death. She is very earnest, you say, that I will not offer to molest her. That, let me tell her, will absolutely depend upon herself, and the answer she returns, whether by pen and ink, or the contemptuous one of silence, which she bestowed upon my last 4 to her. And I will write it in such humble and in such reasonable terms, that, if she be not a true Harlowe, she shall forgive me. But as to the executorship which she is for conferring upon thee, thou shalt not be her executor, let me perish if thou shalt, nor shall she die. Nobody shall be any thing, nobody shall dare to be any thing, to her but I. Thy happiness is already too great, to be admitted daily to her presence, to look upon her, to talk to her, to hear her talk, while I am forbid to come within view of her window. What a reprobation is this, of the man who was once more dear to her than all the men in the world! And now to be able to look down upon me, while her exalted head is hid from me among the stars, sometimes with scorn, at other times with pity! I cannot bear it! This I tell thee, that if I have not success in my effort by letter, I will overcome the creeping folly that has found its way to my heart, or I will tear it out in her presence, and throw it at hers, that she may see how much more tender than her own that organ is, which she, and you, and every one else, have taken the liberty to call callous. Give notice of the people who live back an edge, and on either hand, of the cursed mother, to remove their best effects, if I am rejected, for the first vengeance I shall take will be to set fire to that den of serpents. Nor will there be any fear of taking them when they are in any act that has the relish of salvation in it, as Shakespeare says, so that my revenge, if they perish in the flames I shall light up, will be complete as to them. End of Letter 78. Letter 79 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 79. Mr. Lovelace to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Monday, August 7th. Little as I have reason to expect either your patient ear or forgiving heart, yet cannot I forbear to write to you once more, as a more pardonable intrusion, perhaps, than a visit would be, to beg of you to put it in my power to atone, as far as it is possible to atone, for the injuries I have done you. Your angelic purity and my awakened conscience are standing records of your exalted merit, and of my detestable baseness. But your forgiveness will lay me under an eternal obligation to you. Forgive me then, my dearest life, my earthly good, the visible anchor of my future hope. As you, who believe you have something to be forgiven for, hope for pardon yourself, forgive me, and consent to meet me, upon your own conditions, and in whose company you please, at the holy altar, and to give yourself a title to the most repentant and affectionate heart that ever beat in a human bosom. But perhaps a time of probation may be required. It may be impossible for you, as well from indisposition as doubt, so soon to receive me to absolute favour, as my heart wishes to be received. In this case I will submit to your pleasure, and there shall be no penance which you can impose that I will not cheerfully undergo, if you will be pleased to give me hope that after an expiation, suppose of months, wherein the regularity of my future life and actions shall convince you of my reformation, you will at last be mine. Let me beg then the favour of a few lines, encouraging me in this conditional hope, if it must not be a still nearer hope, and a more generous encouragement. If you refuse me this, you will make me desperate. But even then I must, at all events, throw myself at your feet, that I may not charge myself with the omission of any earnest, any humble effort, to move you in my favour. For in you, Madam, in your forgiveness, are centred my hopes as to both worlds, since to be reprobated finally by you will leave me without expectation of mercy from above. For I am now awakened enough to think that to be forgiven by injured innocence is necessary to the divine pardon, the Almighty putting into the power of such as is reasonable to believe the wretch who causelessly and capitally offends them. And who can be entitled to this power, if you are not? Your cause, Madam, in a word, I look upon to be the cause of virtue, and as such the cause of God. And may I not expect that he will assert it in the petition of a man, who has acted by a person of the most spotless purity as I have done, if you, by rejecting me, show that I have offended beyond the possibility of forgiveness? I do most solemnly assure you that no temporal or worldly views induce me to this earnest address. I deserve not forgiveness from you, nor do my Lord M. and his sisters from me. I despise them from my heart, for presuming to imagine that I will be controlled by the prospect of any benefits in their power to confer. There is not a person breathing but yourself who shall prescribe to me. Your whole conduct, Madam, has been so nobly principled, and your resentments are so admirably just, that you appear to me even in a divine light, and in an infinitely more amiable one at the same time, than you could have appeared in, had you not suffered the barbarous wrongs that now fill my mind with anguish and horror at my own recollected villany to the most excellent of women. I repeat, that all I beg for the present is a few lines to guide my doubtful steps, and, if possible, for you so far to condescend, to encourage me to hope that, if I can justify my present vows by my future conduct, I may be permitted the honour to style myself eternally yours, R. Lovelace. End of Letter 79. Letter 80 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 80. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Lord M. and to the Ladies of his house. Tuesday, August 8th. Excuse me, my good Lord, and my ever-honoured Ladies, from accepting of your noble quarterly bounty, and allow me to return, with all grateful acknowledgement and true humility, the enclosed earnest of your goodness to me. Indeed, I have no need of the one, and cannot possibly want the other; but nevertheless have such a sense of your generous favour, that to my last hour I shall have pleasure in contemplating upon it, and be proud of the place I hold in the esteem of such venerable persons, to whom I once had the ambition to hope to be related. But give me leave to express my concern, that you have banished your kinsman from your presence and favour, since now, perhaps, he will be under less restraint than ever, and since I, in particular, who had hoped by your influence to remain unmolested for the remainder of my days, may again be subjected to his persecutions. He has not, my good lord and my dear ladies, offended against you, as he has against me. Yet you could all very generously intercede for him with me: and shall I be very improper if I desire, for my own peace sake, for the sake of other poor creatures, who may still be injured by him, if he be made quite desperate, and for the sake of all your worthy family, that you will extend to him that forgiveness which you hope for from me? And this the rather, as I presume to think that his daring and impetuous spirit will not be subdued by violent methods, since I have no doubt that the gratifying of a present passion will be always more prevalent with him than any future prospects, however unwarrantable the one, or beneficial the other. Your resentments on my account are extremely generous, as your goodness to me is truly noble: but I am not without hope that he will be properly affected by the evils he has made me suffer, and that when I am laid low and forgotten, your whole honourable family will be enabled to rejoice in his reformation, and see many of those happy years together, which, my good lord, and my dear ladies, you so kindly wish to your ever grateful and obliged Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 80. Letter 81 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 81. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Thursday night, August 10th. You have been informed by Tourville how much Belton's illness and affairs have engaged me, as well as Mowbray and him, since my former. I called at Smith's on Monday, in my way to Epsom. The lady was gone to chapel, but I had the satisfaction to hear she was not worse, and left my compliments, and an intimation that I should be out of town for 3 or 4 days. I refer myself to Tourville, who will let you know the difficulty we had to drive out this meek mistress and frugal manager with her cubs, and to give the poor fellow's sister possession for him of his own house, he skulking meanwhile at an inn at Croydon, too dispirited to appear in his own cause. But I must observe that we were probably but just in time to save the shattered remains of his fortune from this rapacious woman and her accomplices: for as he cannot live long, and she thinks so, we found she had certainly taken measures to set up a marriage, and keep possession of all for herself and her sons. Tourville will tell you how I was forced to chastise the quondam hostler in her sight, before I could drive him out of the house. He had the insolence to lay hands on me, and I made him take but one step from the top to the bottom of a pair of stairs. I thought his neck and all his bones had been broken; and then, he being carried out neck and heels, Thomasine thought fit to walk out after him. Charming consequences of keeping the state we have been so fond of extolling. Whatever it may be thought of in strong health, sickness and declining spirits in the keeper will bring him to see the difference. She should soon have him, she told a confidant, in the space of 6 foot by 5, meaning his bed, and then she would let nobody come near him but whom she pleased. This hostler fellow, I suppose, would then have been his physician, his will ready made for him, and widow's weeds probably ready provided. Who knows but she to appear in them in his own sight? As once I knew an instance in a wicked wife, insulting a husband she hated, when she thought him past recovery, though it gave the man such spirits and such a turn that he got over it, and lived to see her in her coffin, dressed out in the very weeds she had insulted him in. So much for the present, for Belton and his Thomasine. I begin to pity thee heartily, now I see thee in earnest in the fruitless love thou expressest to this angel of a woman; and the rather as, say what thou wilt, it is impossible she should get over her illness, and her friend's implacableness, of which she has had fresh instances. I hope thou art not indeed displeased with the extracts I have made from thy letters for her. The letting her know the justice thou hast done to her virtue in them is so much in favour of thy ingenuousness, a quality, let me repeat, that gives thee a superiority over common libertines, that I think in my heart I was right, though to any other woman, and to one who had not known the worst of thee that she could know, it might have been wrong. If the end will justify the means, it is plain, that I have done well with regard to ye both, since I made her easier, and thee appear in a better light to her, than otherwise thou wouldst have done. But if nevertheless thou art dissatisfied with my having obliged her in a point which I acknowledge to be delicate, let us canvass this matter at our first meeting, and then I will show thee what the extracts were, and what connections I gave them in thy favour. But surely thou dost not pretend to say what I shall or shall not do, as to the executorship. I am my own man, I hope. I think thou shouldst be glad to have the justification of her memory left to one who, at the same time, thou mayest be assured, will treat thee and thy actions with all the lenity the case will admit. I cannot help expressing my surprise at one instance of thy self-partiality, and that is, where thou sayest she has need, indeed, to cry out for mercy herself from her friends, who knows not how to show any. Surely thou canst not think the cases alike. For she, as I understand, desires but a last blessing and a last forgiveness, for a fault in a manner involuntary, if a fault at all, and does not so much as hope to be received. Thou, to be forgiven premeditated wrongs, which, nevertheless, she forgives, on condition to be no more molested by thee, and hopest to be received into favour, and to make the finest jewel in the world thy absolute property in consequence of that forgiveness. I will now briefly proceed to relate what has passed since my last as to the excellent lady. By the account I shall give thee, thou wilt see that she has troubles enough upon her, all springing originally from thyself, without needing to add more to them by new vexations. And as long as thou canst exert thyself so very cavalierly at M. Hall, where every one is thy prisoner, I see not but the bravery of thy spirit may be as well gratified in domineering there over 6 persons of rank and distinction, as it could be over an helpless orphan, as I may call this lady, since she has not a single friend to stand by her, if I do not, and who will think herself happy, if she can refuge herself from thee and from all the world, in the arms of death. My last was dated on Saturday. On Sunday, in compliance with her doctor's advice, she took a little airing. Mrs. Lovick and Mr. Smith and his wife were with her. After being at Highgate Chapel at divine service, she treated them with a little repast, and in the afternoon was at Islington Church in her way home, returning tolerably cheerful. She had received several letters in my absence, as Mrs. Lovick acquainted me, besides yours. Yours, it seems, much distressed her; but she ordered the messenger, who pressed for an answer, to be told that it did not require an immediate one. On Wednesday she received a letter from her uncle Harlowe, in answer to one she had written to her mother on Saturday on her knees. It must be a very cruel one, Mrs. Lovick says, by the effects it had upon her; for when she received it, she was intending to take an afternoon airing in a coach, but was thrown into so violent a fit of hysterics upon it, that she was forced to lie down, and being not recovered by it, to go to bed about 8 o'clock. On Thursday morning she was up very early, and had recourse to the Scriptures to calm her mind, as she told Mrs. Lovick, and, weak as she was, would go in a chair to Lincoln's Inn Chapel about 11. She was brought home a little better, and then sat down to write to her uncle, but was obliged to leave off several times, to struggle, as she told Mrs. Lovick, for an humble temper. My heart, said she to the good woman, is a proud heart, and not yet, I find, enough mortified to my condition; but do what I can, will beat for prescribing resenting things to my pen. I arrived in town from Belton's this Thursday evening, and went directly to Smith's. She was too ill to receive my visit; but, on sending up my compliments, she sent me down word that she should be glad to see me in the morning. Mrs. Lovick obliged me with a copy of a meditation collected by the lady from the Scriptures. She has entitled it, Poor Mortals, the Cause of their own Misery; so entitled, I presume, with intention to take off the edge of her repinings at hardships so disproportioned to her fault, were her fault even as great as she is inclined to think it. We may see by this the method she takes to fortify her mind, and to which she owes, in a great measure, the magnanimity with which she bears her undeserved persecutions. Meditation, Poor Mortals, the Cause of their own Misery. Say not thou, it is through the Lord that I fell away, for thou oughtest not to do the thing that he hateth. Say not thou, he hath caused me to err, for he hath no need of the sinful man. He himself made man from the beginning, and left him in the hand of his own counsel. If thou wilt, to keep the commandments, and to perform acceptable faithfulness. He hath set fire and water before thee. Stretch forth thine hand to whither thou wilt. He hath commanded no man to do wickedly, neither hath he given any man license to sin. And now, Lord, what is my hope? Truly my hope is only in thee. Deliver me from all my offences, and make me not a rebuke unto the foolish. When thou with rebuke dost chasten man for sin, thou makest his beauty to consume away, like as it were a moth fretting a garment. Every man, therefore, is vanity. Turn thee unto me, and have mercy upon me, for I am desolate and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. O bring thou me out of my distresses. Mrs. Smith gave me the following particulars of a conversation that passed between herself and a young clergyman on Tuesday afternoon, who, as it appears, was employed to make inquiries about the lady by her friends. He came into the shop in a riding habit, and asked for some Spanish snuff, and finding only Mrs. Smith there, he desired to have a little talk with her in the back shop. He beat about the bush in several distant questions, and at last began to talk more directly about Miss Harlowe. He said he knew her before her fall, that was his impudent word, and gave the substance of the following account of her, as I collected it from Mrs. Smith. She was then, he said, the admiration and delight of every body. He lamented with great solemnity her backsliding. Another of his phrases. Mrs. Smith said, he was a fine scholar, for he spoke several things she understood not, and either in Latin or Greek, she could not tell which, but was so good as to give her the English of them without asking. A fine thing, she said, for a scholar to be so condescending. He said, her going off with so vile a rake had given great scandal and offence to all the neighbouring ladies, as well as to her friends. He told Mrs. Smith how much she used to be followed by every one's eye, whenever she went abroad, or to church, and praised and blessed by every tongue, as she passed, especially by the poor; that she gave the fashion to the fashionable, without seeming herself to intend it, or to know she did; that, however, it was pleasant to see ladies imitate her in dress and behaviour, who, being unable to come up to her in grace and ease, exposed but their own affectation and awkwardness, at the time that they thought themselves secure of general approbation, because they wore the same things, and put them on in the same manner, that she did, who had every body's admiration; little considering, that were her person like theirs, or if she had their defects, she would have brought up a very different fashion; for that nature was her guide in every thing, and ease her study; which, joined with a mingled dignity and condescension in her air and manner, whether she received or paid a compliment, distinguished her above all her sex. He spoke not, he said, his own sentiments only on this occasion, but those of every body; for that the praise of Miss Clarissa Harlowe was such a favourite topic, that a person who could not speak well upon any other subject was sure to speak well upon that, because he could say nothing but what he had heard repeated and applauded 20 times over. Hence it was, perhaps, that this novice accounted for the best things he said himself, though I must own that the personal knowledge of the lady, which I am favoured with, made it easy to me to look into shape what the good woman reported to me as the character given her by the young Levite; for who, even now, in her decline of health, sees not that all these attributes belong to her. I suppose he has not been long come from college, and now thinks he has nothing to do but to blaze away for a scholar among the ignorant; as such young fellows are apt to think those who cannot cap verses with them, and tell us how an ancient author expressed himself in Latin, on a subject upon which, however, they may know how, as well as that author, to express themselves in English. Mrs. Smith was so taken with him, that she would fain have introduced him to the lady, not questioning but it would be very acceptable to her to see one who knew her and her friends so well. But this he declined for several reasons, as he called them, which he gave. One was, that persons of his cloth should be very cautious of the company they were in, especially where sex was concerned, and where a woman had slurred her reputation. I wish I had been there when he gave himself these airs. Another, that he was desired to inform himself of her present way of life, and who her visitors were; for, as to the praises Mrs. Smith gave the lady, he hinted that she seemed to be a good-natured woman, and might, though for the lady's sake he hoped not, be too partial and short-sighted to be trusted to, absolutely, in a concern of so high a nature, as he intimated the task was which he had undertaken; nodding out words of doubtful import, and assuming airs of great significance, as I could gather, throughout the whole conversation. And when Mrs. Smith told him that the lady was in a very bad state of health, he gave a careless shrug. She may be very ill, says he. Her disappointment must have touched her to the quick. But she is not bad enough, I dare say, yet to atone for her very great lapse, and to expect to be forgiven by those whom she has so much disgraced. A starch conceited coxcomb! What would I give he had fallen in my way! He departed, highly satisfied with himself, no doubt, and assured of Mrs. Smith's great opinion of his sagacity and learning, but bid her not say any thing to the lady about him or his inquiries; and I, for very different reasons, enjoined the same thing. I am glad, however, for her peace of mind's sake, that they begin to think it behoves them to inquire about her. End of Letter 81. Letter 82 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 82. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Friday, August 11th. Mr. Belford acquaints his friend with the generosity of Lord M. and the ladies of his family, and with the lady's grateful sentiments upon the occasion. He says, that in hopes to avoid the pain of seeing him, Mr. Lovelace, she intends to answer his letter of the 7th, though much against her inclination. She took great notice, says Mr. Belford, of that passage in yours, which makes necessary to the divine pardon the forgiveness of a person causelessly injured. Her grandfather, I find, has enabled her at 18 years of age to make her will, and to devise great part of his estate to whom she pleases of the family, and the rest out of it, if she die single, at her own discretion; and this to create respect to her, as he apprehended that she would be envied, and she now resolves to set about making her will out of hand. Mr. Belford insists upon the promise he had made him not to molest the lady, and gives him the contents of her answer to Lord M. and the ladies of his lordship's family, declining their generous offers. End of Letter 82. Letter 83 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 83. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Robert Lovelace, Esquire, Friday, August 11th. It is a cruel alternative to be either forced to see you or to write to you. But a will of my own has been long denied me, and to avoid a greater evil, nay, now I may say, the greatest, I write. Were I capable of disguising or concealing my real sentiments, I might safely, I dare say, give you the remote hope you request, and yet keep all my resolutions. But I must tell you, Sir, it becomes my character to tell you that, were I to live more years than perhaps I may weeks, and there were not another man in the world, I could not, I would not, be yours. There is no merit in performing a duty. Religion enjoins me not only to forgive injuries, but to return good for evil. It is all my consolation, and I bless God for giving me that I am now in such a state of mind with regard to you, that I can cheerfully obey its dictates. And accordingly I tell you that wherever you go, I wish you happy, and in this I mean to include every good wish. And now, having with great reluctance, I own, complied with one of your compulsatory alternatives, I expect the fruits of it. Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 83. Letter 84 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 84. Mr. John Harlowe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Monday, August 7th. Poor, ungrateful, naughty kinswoman! Your mother neither caring nor being permitted to write, I am desired to set pen to paper, though I had resolved against it. And so I am to tell you that your letters, joined to the occasion of them, almost break the hearts of us all. Were we sure you had seen your folly, and were truly penitent, and at the same time that you were so very ill as you pretend, I know not what might be done for you. But we are all acquainted with your moving ways when you want to carry a point. Unhappy girl! How miserable have you made us all! We, who used to visit with so much pleasure, now cannot endure to look upon one another. If you had not known, upon 100 occasions, how dear you once was to us, you might judge of it now, were you to know how much your folly has unhinged us all. Naughty, naughty girl! You see the fruits of preferring a rake and libertine to a man of sobriety and morals, against full warning, against better knowledge, and such a modest creature too as you were. How could you think of such an unworthy preference? Your mother can't ask, and your sister knows not in modesty how to ask, and so I ask you, if you have any reason to think yourself with child by this villain? You must answer this, and answer it truly, before any thing can be resolved upon about you. You may well be touched with a deep remorse for your misdeeds. Could I ever have thought that my doting piece, as every one called you, would have done thus? To be sure, I loved you too well. But that is over now. Yet though I will not pretend to answer for any body but myself, for my own part, I say, God forgive you. And this is all from your afflicted uncle, John Harlowe. The following meditation was stitched to the bottom of this letter with black silk. Meditation. O that thou wouldst hide me in the grave, that thou wouldst keep me secret till thy wrath be past. My face is foul with weeping, and on my eyelid is the shadow of death. My friends scorn me, but mine eye poureth out tears unto God. A dreadful sound is in my ears. In prosperity the destroyer came upon me. I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am a burden to myself? When I say my bed shall comfort me, my couch shall ease my complaint, then thou scarest me with dreams, and terrifiest me through visions, so that my soul chooseth strangling and death rather than life. I loathe it. I would not live always. Let me alone, for my days are vanity. He hath made me a byword of the people, and aforetime I was as a tabret. My days are past. My purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. When I looked for good, then evil came unto me, and when I waited for light, then came darkness. And where now is my hope? Yet all the days of my appointed time will I wait, till my change come. End of Letter 84. Letter 85 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 85. Miss Clarissa Harlowe, to John Harlowe, Esq., Thursday, August 10th. Honoured Sir, it was an act of charity I begged, only for a last blessing, that I might die in peace. I asked not to be received again, as my severe sister (oh, that I had not written to her!) is pleased to say is my view. Let that grace be denied me when I do. I could not look forward to my last scene with comfort, without seeking, at least, to obtain the blessing I petitioned for; and that with a contrition so deep, that I deserve not, were it known, to be turned over from the tender nature of a mother to the upbraiding pen of an uncle; and to be wounded by a cruel question, put by him in a shocking manner, and which a very little time, will better answer than I can. For I am not either a hardened or shameless creature. If I were, I should not have been so solicitous to obtain the favour I sued for. And permit me to say that I asked it as well for my father and mother's sake as for my own; for I am sure they at least will be uneasy, after I am gone, that they refused it to me. I should still be glad to have theirs, and yours, Sir, and all your blessings, and your prayers. But, denied in such a manner, I will not presume again to ask it; relying entirely on the Almighty's, which is never denied, when supplicated for with such true penitence as I hope mine is. God preserve my dear uncle, and all my honoured friends, prays your unhappy Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 85. End of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 7, by Samuel Richardson.